Section 1. The Age of Ancients and the World Before Fire. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a world without warmth, a world without color, without contrast, without the quiet pull of a heartbeat in the dark. No wind moving through leaves, no shadows stretching long in afternoon light, nothing to mark the passing of time, because time, in any meaningful sense, does not yet exist. Just gray, just stone, just an immense, breathless stillness that has lasted longer than anything we have words for. In the beginning of the Dark Souls story, there are no people. There are no gods, no kings, no knights, standing at crossroads with destiny pressing down on their shoulders. There is no hunger because there is no need, no grief because there is nothing to lose, no love because love requires the presence of something that could be absent. The conditions for all of those things do not exist yet. What exists is gray, an enormous, ancient gray that covers everything from the floor of the world to the ceiling of it, undifferentiated, patient, permanent in the way that only things which have never had to earn their permanence can be permanent. The gray crags, the gray sky, the gray bodies of the arch trees, vast and leafless, rooted in the rock of the world, with a grip that suggests they have been there since before the concept of a beginning was possible. And among all of this, the everlasting dragons. This is how Dark Souls begins, not with a hero standing at a crossroads, not with a kingdom in crisis, not with a prophecy carved into ancient stone. It begins with nothing, or rather, with something so close to nothing that the difference barely matters. A gray land shrouded in fog, vast ancient trees called arch trees stretching into a sky that offers no warmth, no light, no direction. And among all of this, ruling over the gray crags and the colorless stone, the creatures who have always been here, and who have, perhaps, always been here. The game does not tell us the age of ancients. It cannot. Time did not function the way time functions now, because the fire, which brought heat and cold and life and death, also brought the concept of before and after. Before the flame, there was only is, no was, no will be, just the perpetual, dimensionless present of stone and silence. So when we ask how long the everlasting dragons ruled, the question may not be meaningfully answerable. They ruled for as long as there was a world and no fire, and that span could be anything from 1,000 years to an eternity, with no useful difference between those two numbers. What we can say is that this world had its own strange beauty. Think of vast plains of gray stone under a sky that was itself a kind of stone, dense and colorless and close. Think of those arch trees, which were enormous beyond the scale we usually apply to trees, their trunks wider than cathedrals, their root systems threading through the rock of the world like fingers working through clay, their crowns somewhere in the upper atmosphere of a world that had no weather. Think of the dragons, pale and enormous and slow, moving through the gray with the unhurried certainty of things that have never needed to hurry. They were not cruel beings, or kind ones. Those categories did not yet apply to anything. The dragons were simply enormous presences in a world that had no one to compare them to, no contrast that could make their nature visible even to themselves. If they were aware of each other, the game does not tell us what that awareness was like. They may have communicated in ways that did not require sound or even movement. They may have simply coexisted, vast and adjacent, like mountains that happen to breathe. The arched trees were their landscape. Some theories within the lore suggest that the dragons were not separate from the environment, but part of it, their stone scales literally continuous with the stone of the crags. The boundary between dragon and landscape less absolute than it would become for the creatures who came after them. This would explain the permanence. The everlasting dragons were not alive in the way a butterfly is alive, fragile and briefly burning. They were alive the way stone is alive, geological and patient and present in a way that simply does not age. The everlasting dragons. Now, when we say everlasting, that word is doing a lot of work. These are not the dragons you may picture when someone says that word. They are not fire-breathing beasts with hordes of gold and territories to defend. They are something closer to the landscape itself given a slow, breathing form. They are stone. Their scales are made of it, dense and impenetrable, the same gray and featureless material that comprises everything else in this age. And because they are made of stone, because their very nature is one with the unchanging permanence of the world around them, they simply do not die. They cannot die. The concept does not apply to them. They are not alive in the way that word will eventually come to mean. They endure. The Arch trees are interesting to think about in this context because they grow alongside the dragons and seem to serve no purpose we can easily name. They are not forests in the lush sense of the word. They are enormous, petrified things, ancient beyond reckoning, their roots threading down through the gray stone of the earth in ways that suggest they have been growing since before the world had any shape at all. Some scholars of the lore have suggested that the first flame itself may have been born somewhere within the root systems of these trees, deep underground where the stone press is heaviest and the silence is most complete, that the fire emerged not from the sky or from some act of divine will, but from the grinding pressure of the earth itself, the way a spark can leap from flint against stone. Whether this is true or simply a theory, it captures something important about the nature of this world. Nothing was planned, nothing was intended. Things simply happened, and the world changed whether it wanted to or not. There is something almost peaceful about the Age of Ancients when you sit with it. I know that sounds strange given what we are about to move into, given the thousands of years of war, and fire, and sacrifice and madness that will follow. But the world of the everlasting dragons is a world without suffering, precisely because it is a world without anything. No hunger because nothing needs to feed. No grief because nothing can be lost. No ambition because there is nowhere to climb. Just the stone and the fog and the arch trees and the great gray bodies of the dragons resting on their ridgelines, watching over a world that will never change. And then something changed. No one knows where the first flame came from. The game never tells us, and the scholars within its world do not know either. It is, in the truest sense, the first mystery. One moment the world was gray and cold and timeless, and then there was fire, a light in the deep places, burning in a way that stone does not burn, throwing shadows where there had never been shadows before. And with the fire came something stranger still. The first flame brought with it what the world calls disparity, heat and cold, light and dark, life and death. These are the foundations of all things, and they did not exist before this moment. The entire architecture of existence as we understand it, the premise that things can matter because they can be lost, that warmth is precious because cold is real, that life is worth protecting because death is waiting, all of it emerged from a single, unexplained fire burning in a cave beneath the gray crags of a world that had no name yet. And from that darkness, from the cold shadow that the fire's light pushed back but could not eliminate, beings emerged. They were not everlasting dragons. They were something new, smaller, more fragile, already mortal in some fundamental way that the dragons were not. The game calls them hollows in the broad early sense, though that word will take on much darker meaning as our story continues. They were proto-beings, proto-people, drawn toward the fire the way all new things are drawn toward warmth. And near that fire, left scattered in the darkness around it like gifts no one had placed there, were 4 mighty souls. Not souls in the human spiritual sense, though that too will matter. These were physical things, condensations of power, objects of such immense and fundamental significance that to touch one was to be changed at a level deeper than blood or bone. They were Lord souls, and 4 of those early beings found them. The first found the power of death. He became Nito, the first of the dead, and his soul was a thing of endings and stillness, a power over life's cessation that would eventually make him one of the most fundamental forces in all of Lordran. Nito is described in the opening cinematic as a heap of bones wrapped in a burial shroud, and the image is accurate to what he becomes, a figure composed of skeletons fused together into something barely recognizable as having once been a single person, dripping with the miasma of plague and rot, and the quiet authority of the grave. But at the moment of discovery, he was simply a being who found something in the dark and was made greater and stranger by it. The second found something vast and female and alive with heat. She became the Witch of Izalith, and with her daughters she wove great firestorms that scorched the sky and set the arch trees alight. Her power was creation and destruction bound together, the same force that burns fields to make them fertile again, the same energy that tears apart what was to make room for what could be. She would go on to found a great underground civilization at a place called Izalith, and her daughters would become among the most powerful magical beings in the world. And she would eventually, in a moment of ambition, we will spend a long time with, burn everything she had built to the ground. The third found light. He found sunlight and thunder and the authority of the sky, and he became Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, and everything about his name is right. He is a god the way gods are supposed to feel, enormous and golden and certain, wielding spears of lightning that peel the stone scales from dragons, the way a knife peels bark from wood. He would build Anor Londo, the city of gods, that glittering monument to everything the Age of Fire would become. He would shape the world in his image for 1,000 years, and then he would sit down in the embers of the dying fire he had built his entire existence around and let it consume him. And that moment of sacrifice, that hollow desperation, is the center around which all of Dark Souls orbits. It is worth saying more about Gwyn in this early moment, before all of his choices made themselves, before the fear that would define him took hold. In the beginning, he was simply a person who found power and used it without hesitation. His lightning was not something he learned or trained toward. It was simply what he was, the way that some people are constitutionally suited to the cold and others to warmth. The Lord Soul of Light made him what the world needed at that moment, which was someone capable of making the dragons afraid. And he was that, genuinely, completely, without complication. When Gwyn's lightning hit a dragon's stone scales, the scales cracked. When they cracked, the immortality cracked with them. He was the key that fit the lock, and the war that had been unwinnable became winnable the day he raised his hand and let the sky come down. His knights followed him, not out of obligation, but out of something much harder to manufacture, which was genuine belief. They believed in him. They believed in the world he was building. The Silver Knights who marched at his side in the Dragon Wars wore his aesthetic, gleamed with his sunlight, carried weapons that mimicked in miniature the spears of lightning he threw from his hands. They were, in their way, an expression of him, a world made in his image walking alongside him, and that image was genuinely beautiful before it became something that needed to be maintained at terrible cost. And the fourth was the furtive pygmy. The word furtive is doing something very deliberate there. Furtive means secretive, hidden, moving in the margins where it is easier not to be noticed. And the pygmy is all of those things. They are so easily forgotten. The game even says so in the opening narration. So easily forgotten. And yet what they found was arguably more powerful than anything the other three claimed, because the furtive pygmy found the dark soul. The fourth and last of the Lord Souls, born not from the light of the fire, but from the darkness it pushed back. And what they did with it was something none of the others did. They did not keep it whole. They fragmented it. They scattered it. They gave it away in countless tiny pieces that would become the vestiges of what we eventually call humanity. And by doing so, they seeded every human being who would ever live with a sliver of something cosmically significant. This choice, the fragmentation of the dark soul, is the defining act of human history in Lordran. Because the dark soul scattered means that no single being ever has access to its full power, and that full power, accumulated and whole, was what made the Lord Souls dangerous to the status quo the other three had built. Gwyn distributed some of his soul too, but strategically, to people he trusted, in controlled fragments. The pygmy's distribution was total, unconditional, every single human being, not just the worthy or the faithful or the powerful, everyone. There is something about that choice that deserves to sit with you for a moment. The pygmy found something world-altering and gave it away, not kept it, not built a civilization on the exclusive possession of it, gave it, scattered it into the world like seeds, trusting that whatever grew from those seeds would be worth the loss of the consolidated power. Whether this was wisdom or simply the impulse of someone who understood instinctively that the dark belongs to everyone, we cannot say. But the consequences of that fragmentation echo through every century that follows. This is where people come from, in the Dark Souls cosmology. We are all carrying a small piece of the Dark Soul, all of us, which means we are all, in some sense, heirs to that original discovery. And it means that what eventually happens to humanity in this story, the cursing and the hollowing and the endless cycle of fire and sacrifice and rebirth, is not happening to strangers. It is happening to the inheritors of something the first of us found in the dark. Now the war began. With their Lord Souls and their newfound power, and the enormous armies that gathered around them, in the age between the discovery of the fire and the true beginning of the Age of Fire, the lords turned on the everlasting dragons. This was not an easy war. For every dragon killed, the accounts suggest, the lords lost vast numbers of their own soldiers. The dragons were genuinely formidable, genuinely hard to kill, their stone scales deflecting most of what was thrown at them. But the lords had something the dragons did not. They had disparity. They had the hunger of beings who could die, which made them fight in ways that beings who cannot die never will. And they had a traitor. Seath the Scaleless was an everlasting dragon who was not, in any meaningful sense, everlasting. Born without the stone scales that made his kind immortal, he had lived among the dragons as a permanent outsider, always aware of his own mortality in a race that had never learned to reckon with it. And when the lords came offering power and recognition and a place in whatever world would come after the war, Seath said yes. He revealed the secret of the dragon's immortality, that the scales were the key, and then he fought alongside Gwyn himself in the systematic destruction of everything his kind had built over the long gray millennia of the Age of Ancients. Gwyn's lightning peeled apart those stone scales. The witches of Izalith burned the great trees. Nito unleashed plagues that spread across stone and flesh alike. And Seath, knowing exactly where his former kindred were most vulnerable, guided the assault with the precision of someone who had spent his entire existence being reminded of what he lacked. The dragons fell. Not all of them, not immediately, not in a single clean sweep, but enough. Enough that the world changed. The gray crags remained, the arch trees remained, but now there was fire and light and a new civilization building itself atop the bones of the old. And the everlasting dragons that remained, stripped of their scales, stripped of their immortality, became things that could at least theoretically be wounded and killed. They retreated. Some died. A few endured in diminished forms, shadows of what their ancestors had been, haunting the deep places and the high places alike. And so, the Age of Ancients ended, and the Age of Fire began. It is worth pausing here, before we move forward, to think about what just happened on a level beneath the history. Because there is a pattern here that will repeat itself, in different forms, with different players, across every chapter of this story we are about to tell. Something permanent was destroyed so that something else could exist. The dragons did not choose to end. The gray world did not choose to become colorful and painful and mortal. The change was imposed on it from outside, by beings who had found something powerful and decided that their vision of the future mattered more than what was. And those beings would spend the next 1,000 years repeating that same choice, again and again, imposing their version of existence on a world that kept trying to find its own way forward. The fire came. With it came everything, and everything it brought would eventually need to be paid for. Before we continue, I want to say something real to you. If you are finding this settling, if the slow unraveling of this ancient story is beginning to pull you towards sleep, that is exactly what it is meant to do. Let the history of Lordran wash through you. Let the details drift where they want to drift. And if you are finding yourself genuinely absorbed, genuinely awake and curious about what comes next, then welcome. There is so much more to explore. If you want more of this, if you want to keep swimming in these deep old waters whenever you need rest, then consider subscribing. It costs nothing but a click, and it means everything in terms of letting me know to keep making these. Leave a comment too, if something here caught you, a detail you love, a character you want to hear more about. I read every single one. Now, let us follow Gwyn into the light. Section 2. Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, and the City of Gods, Anor. Londo is a place that exists in the memory of everyone who has ever played Dark Souls in a way that is very difficult to explain to someone who has not. You have been traveling, by the time you reach it, through sewers and swamps and a crumbling undead city and a fortress designed entirely to kill you, with enormous metal pendulums and snake-headed guardians. Everything in the world you have been moving through is ash gray and brown and the color of things that have been abandoned. And then you pass through the gates of Anor Londo and the sky is golden and the architecture is vast and gleaming and cathedral-like in its ambition. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a voice says, "Oh, this is where the gods live." And then you spend the next few hours discovering that the gods are gone and the light is an illusion. And the only thing left here is a young man who has wrapped himself in the persona of his absent sister in a desperate attempt to keep some version of civilization from collapsing entirely. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Gwyn built Anor Londo in the aftermath of the Dragon Wars as a statement. Everything about the city is intentional. The scale is inhuman. The the pillars and archways sized for beings who are not quite mortal in the way that ordinary people are mortal, the silver and gold of the stonework, the cathedral at the center, the sun that never quite sets. These are all choices made by a king who understood that power is as much about appearance as it is about force, and who wanted the Age of Fire to look like something worth protecting. He was not wrong about that. The Age of Fire was worth protecting, at least in its early days, at least before it began to cost more than it was worth. Gwyn was the bearer of the Lord's soul of light, and everything about him reflects that. His soul manifested as great bolts of sunlight, condensed lightning fired from his hands like spears hurled from the sky. His knights carried the same aesthetic, dressed in gleaming silver, their weapons crackling with the same golden energy. Sunlight, in the Dark Souls world, is not merely light. It is a manifestation of power, of the fire, of the authority that Gwyn claimed when he found his Lord's soul in the dark. The sun in Lordran is, in a sense, Gwyn's sun. He made it matter. Before him, the world had no need for it. The interesting tension in Gwyn's character is between the genuine greatness of what he built and the genuine smallness of why he destroyed it. He built a civilization of real beauty and real function. He defeated the dragons, which were genuinely oppressive in the sense that the world could not develop under their grey dominion. He gave humanity and the gods and all the beings that came after the First Flame a stage on which to act, a world with warmth and seasons and possibility. This is real. It happened. The Age of Fire was not entirely propaganda, but he maintained it through lies, and he maintained it past its natural end, and the cost of that maintenance fell on everyone except himself. He got to sacrifice himself gloriously, burning in the kiln with his loyal knights, his choice made on his own terms, at a moment of his choosing. The undead who followed him into the same fire did not get that. They got a curse they did not ask for, a journey they were told was their duty, a choice that was framed as heroism, but was in reality the next cycle of fuel for a flame that should have been allowed to go out. His family is complicated in the way that the families of powerful men tend to be complicated. He had a firstborn son, a god of war whose name has been deliberately erased from history, who was punished for some transgression Gwyn considered unforgivable. The details are scattered across item descriptions and environmental hints, but the broad picture suggests that Gwyn's firstborn son committed some kind of sin related to the dragons, potentially a relationship or alliance with dragonkind after the Dragon Wars were supposed to be over, and was stripped of his divine status and cast out. His name does not appear anywhere in official church records. His image has been removed from statues. He is a deliberate absence, a hole cut in the shape of a person, and the question of who he was and what he did will haunt the corners of this story for a long time. In Dark Souls 3, there is a figure called the Nameless King, who is strongly implied to be Gwyn's forgotten firstborn. He rides a Stormdrake, an ancient dragon, in his boss fight. His armor and his weapons all suggest an ancient warrior who was once associated with Gwyn's forces, but who has been separated from that association for so long that his name has genuinely been lost, not just suppressed but forgotten. He rules over Archdragon Peak, a place where humans who aspire to the dragon form go to train and shed their humanity. He presides over the last remnants of the ancient bond between humans and dragons, the bond that Gwyn found so intolerable that he erased his own son from the record for it, and from what we see of him, he is extraordinary. The Nameless King is possibly the most difficult boss in Dark Souls 3, a fighter of such speed and precision and aggression that he feels unlike anything else in the game's roster. Whatever Gwyn tried to bury, it turned out to be genuinely exceptional. The disowned son, forgotten, stripped of his name, ended up in a place of great beauty, building something real with the people Gwyn never trusted. Whether this reflects well on the son or poorly on the father depends on how you read it. Dark Souls typically leaves that to you. Then there was Gwynevere, Princess of Sunlight, enormous and warm and generous, beloved by everyone who met her. Or so the story goes. We will revisit that. And finally, born last and perhaps loved least, there was Gwyndolin. Gwyndolin was Gwyn's youngest child, a boy born with an affinity for moonlight and illusion magic, and because the moon and its cold silver light represented the opposite of everything Gwyn's power stood for, he made a choice about his child that reflects both his rigidity and his particular kind of love. He raised Gwyndolin as a daughter, dressed the child in robes, surrounded them with serpents, which are associated with the moon, and with the magic of illusion, and gave them every tool except the one thing they perhaps wanted most, which was to be seen clearly. Gwyndolin became a powerful illusionist and the head of the Dark Moon Covenant, a divine justice organization that punished those who committed sins against the gods. And alone of all Gwyn's children, Gwyndolin stayed in Anor Londo after everything else collapsed, maintaining the fiction of the city's grandeur through nothing but magic and sheer force of will. But before the collapse, before Anor Londo became a ghost of itself, there was the Golden Age. And in that Golden Age, Gwyn distributed his power carefully, deliberately, to the people and beings he trusted most. He gave fragments of his Lord's soul to his children. He gave a piece to Seath the Scaleless, the dragon trader who had made the Dragon Wars winnable, and with that power and the resources of a new dukedom, Seath began his research into what would become sorcery. He gave power to the 4 kings of New Londo, a human city built on principles of justice and governance that Gwyn wanted to reward. He established covenants and alliances and the framework of a world that could sustain itself. And he gathered around him 4 knights who represent 4 different aspects of what it meant to serve during the Age of Fire. There is something that deserves to be said about the relationship between Gwyn and his knights that goes beyond the formal structure of lord and servant. These 4 were not merely good fighters assigned to his protection. They were people who believed in what he stood for, who had found in the Age of Fire a world worth defending, and who brought their individual gifts to that defense with a wholeness that is very rare in any kind of history. The Age of Fire, before everything began to unravel, had this quality of genuine conviction. The people who built it believed in it. They were not cynical about what they were making, and that makes the eventual fall harder because it was not corruption that destroyed it, not betrayal from within the circle of the faithful. It was entropy. It was the fundamental truth that fire fades, applied to a world built on fire. Ornstein the Dragon Slayer was perhaps the most traditional of them, a warrior of enormous physical power whose golden lion armor became iconic. He wielded a spear that crackled with lightning in imitation of his lord, and he dedicated his existence to the hunt of dragons. Even after the Dragon Wars were over, after the everlasting dragons were largely gone, Ornstein remained vigilant against the possibility of their return. He served as the guardian of Anor Londo alongside Smough the Executioner, the 2 of them forming the most infamous duo in all of Dark Souls, the obstacle that broke more new players and generated more frustrated late-night sessions than perhaps any other enemy in the game's history. Smough himself deserves a moment of attention, even though he is not one of the 4 knights. He was Anor Londo's executioner, a massive figure known for his cruelty, who was denied the honor of knighthood by Gwyn because of practices the king found unacceptable. He enjoyed his work in ways that made even the gods uncomfortable. And yet there he is, standing at Ornstein's side at the gate to Guinevere's chamber, one of the last functioning defenses of a city that every other god has already abandoned. Whatever Smough was, whatever he did that made him unacceptable for knighthood, he stayed. When staying required nothing but violence, he was adequate to the task. There is something darkly funny about this, and something darkly real. The institutions of power, when they are falling, often find that the people they would never have promoted in better days are the ones still available for their last defense. There is a theory, which has some supporting evidence in the item descriptions of Dark Souls 3, that Ornstein left in Anor Londo, that the Ornstein guarding the city alongside Smough is an illusion maintained by Gwendolin's magic, the same magic that kept Guinevere present and the sunlight golden, and that the real Ornstein traveled to the land of Lothric in pursuit of his final dragon-hunting purpose. This would mean the most iconic fight in the series is, on some level, a performance. 2 projections of defenders past their time, maintaining the image of a protection that no longer exists in substance. Whether this interpretation is correct or not, it fits the pattern of Anor Londo as a place of beautiful lies. Hawkeye Goff was the opposite in many ways. A giant, blind after years of hunting dragons with his great bow, Goff was someone whose most celebrated skill had rendered him unable to benefit from what it won. He lost his sight in service to the war against dragonkind, and after the war ended he became a woodcarver, fashioning small figures with enormous hands guided by touch rather than sight. He is found in Oolacile, in the DLC chapter of the first game, imprisoned in a tower, but still calm, still dignified, still capable of remarkable things when the situation demands it. Of all of Gwyn's knights, Goff reads most clearly as a person rather than a symbol. His blindness, his craft, his quiet resignation to his circumstances, these make him feel real in a way that the more legendary figures sometimes do not. When the chosen undead reaches him in Oolacile, trapped in his tower with the great bow he can no longer aim, Goff talks. He talks about what he sees, even blind, through his other senses and through the accumulated understanding of decades. He talks about the sky and the distant movements of things. He is, in the quiet of his imprisonment, still paying attention to the world, even when the world has stopped paying attention to him. And when you need him to shoot a specific target in the sky, to bring down something that threatens everything, he does it with the calm surety of someone for whom competence has become a form of meditation. He cannot see it. He shoots anyway. The bolt lands. Some people would say that is Gwyn's legacy. People who cannot see clearly anymore, but remember what they were trained to do and do it anyway, in the dark, at the end of things. Ciaran was a different kind of knight entirely. Where Ornstein was power and Goff was range, Ciaran was precision. She was an assassin, wielding paired blades with a deadly grace, and the evidence suggests she may have been deeply attached to Artorias, the fourth knight. She is found mourning at his grave in Oolacile, and the item descriptions around her suggest that her grief is real and recent. She is one of the game's smallest stories, but one of its most affecting. A person standing over a grave with nothing left to do but remember, and Artorias himself. We will spend much more time with him later, when we descend into the story of Oolacile and the Abyss. But for now, know that he was considered the greatest of Gwyn's knights, a swordsman of such legendary skill that even centuries after his death, his name was still spoken with reverence, and young knights were forming orders in his memory. He was called the Abyss Walker, which tells you something about what he did, and perhaps something about what it cost him. Gwyn also had allies beyond his own household. The primordial serpents, enormous beings who resemble the snake men found elsewhere in the game, but are vastly more ancient and more aware, served as intermediaries between Gwyn and humanity. Two of them are named. Kingseeker Frampt, who aligned himself with Gwyn's agenda and would spend centuries afterward trying to guide undead toward relinking the First Flame in service to that same agenda. And Darkstalker Kaathi, who had his own very different agenda, which we will come to in time. These serpents knew things about the structure of the world that the gods themselves did not fully understand, and their interventions in human history shaped events in ways that no single character could see clearly. The early years of the Age of Fire were good by the standards of a world that had just emerged from a condition of gray stasis. Civilizations grew, art was made, humans lived and died and built things and burned them and built them again. The bonfires were lit across the land, linked to the First Flame in a web of warmth that made travel and rest possible. The gods were worshipped not just out of fear, but out of something more like gratitude, because the fire was real. And the fire mattered, and Gwyn was the reason both of those things were true. But fire fades. This is the fundamental truth of the Dark Souls universe, and it is stated plainly in the opening narration as if it is no more controversial than the fact that summer ends. Fire fades. And when the First Flame began to dim, everything built around it began to dim with it. Gwyn's power weakened. His children began to scatter. The other lords, Nito in his tomb, the Witch of Izalith in her city, began to feel the change in the world's bones. The warmth that had made the Age of Fire possible was becoming a memory, and the darkness that warmth had pushed back was beginning to return. And here is where we arrive at the thing that defines Gwyn not as a god, but as a person. He was afraid, terrifyingly, comprehensively afraid, in the way that powerful people sometimes are, because they have more to lose than anyone else and they can see it slipping. He had built an entire age. He had defeated the dragons. He had constructed a civilization that worked, that had beauty and order and purpose. And now the fire was fading, and the dark was rising, and in the dark lived humanity, with its dark souls and its potential, and Gwyn understood something about what humanity's ascension might mean for everything he had created. The serpent Kaathi would later say this plainly. Lord Gwyn trembled at the dark. Clinging to his Age of Fire, and in dire fear of humans, and the Dark Lord who would one day be born amongst them, Gwyn resisted the course of nature. What does it mean to resist the course of nature? In this world, it means treating the inevitable as the enemy. It means building systems whose entire purpose is to delay the thing that cannot be permanently delayed. It means sacrifice on a scale that only a god with a god's lifespan can contemplate. Because the sacrifices needed to hold back darkness for a century or a millennium require a willingness to accept costs that a mortal being would never live long enough to fully understand. Gwyn's plan was this: link himself to the first flame, feed his own soul, his lord's soul, his everything, directly into the fire, and use that as fuel to keep the Age of Fire burning beyond its natural lifespan. It was not a plan that offered him survival. It was not a plan that offered the world salvation. It was a plan that offered a delay. And he took it anyway, because even a delay felt better than letting go. He left Anor Londo with a contingent of his Black Knights, those silver and gold warriors who had served him for centuries, and together they marched to the kiln of the first flame. The Black Knights were not meant to survive the experience. They burned in the reignition of the flame, their armored forms scorched by the same fire that consumed their lord, and afterward they wandered Lordran as charred spirits, ghosts of soldiers who had followed their king into a fire he had chosen to die in. They are one of the game's most haunting images, those black armored figures moving through the ruins of a world their sacrifice bought a few more centuries of. And Gwyn himself became something that the game calls a Lord of Cinder. He is not dead, exactly. He persists, bound to the flame, hollow in the most complete sense of the word, all purpose and memory and self consumed in that fire. By the time the chosen undead finds him at the end of the first game, he attacks without recognition. There is nothing left of the god who built the world. There is only reflex, only the mechanical aggression of something that knows it needs to defend this fire, even if it no longer knows why. The final boss of Dark Souls is not a monster. He is a man who burned away everything he was in service to a world he loved too much to let naturally end. And the tragedy is that it did not work. Not really, not forever. The flame burned a little longer. The Age of Fire was extended. But flames do not burn forever no matter what you feed them. And the world Gwyn bought with everything he had was already, by the time we arrive in it, crumbling at its edges. We arrive in a world of dying bonfires and ruined kingdoms, and people so desperate to hold on to what was that they will happily send strangers to their deaths, trying to relight the thing that was never going to stay lit. And somewhere in the kiln of the first flame, barely recognizable as what he once was, the Lord of Sunlight waits, guarding the very thing he gave himself to, unable to stop, unable to rest, unable to let go. Section 3. Nito, the Witch of Izalith, and the Birth of Demons. There is a chamber at the bottom of the catacombs, beneath the tomb of the giants, where the darkness is absolute and the silence has a weight to it, a silence that feels inhabited, that feels like the silence of something that has been waiting in it for a very long time. And at the center of that weight, enthroned in the deep, is Gravelord Nito, the first of the dead, surrounded by skeletons in the way that a king is surrounded by courtiers. He is one of the most visually arresting characters in the entire game, a figure composed of multiple skeletons fused together, wrapped in a burial shroud, draped in a fog that smells of plague and decay. His Lord's soul manifested as dominion over death itself, the power to still the living and command the dead, and in the Age of Fire he used that power in the service of what the game suggests was a genuinely sincere commitment to the natural order. Nito believed in death, not as an enemy to be overcome, but as a necessary thing, the counterweight to life, the mechanism by which the world maintains its balance. When the first flame was new and the Lord's souls had just been claimed, Nito turned his plague and his miasma loose on the everlasting dragons, helping to bring down creatures that could not otherwise have been touched. Disease crept into whatever spaces the lightning could not reach, rotting from within what could not be destroyed from without. He was effective. He was terrible. And when the war was over, he retreated to his tomb and spent the next 1,000 years doing what amounts to a cosmic administrative function, overseeing the flow of death in a world that was only just learning to have it. But Nito is interesting because of what he represents beneath the surface of his role. He is the Lord Soul of Endings, and the Age of Fire is fundamentally a story about people who refuse to accept endings. Gwyn refused. The Witch of Izalith refused. Even most of the players, when given the choice, instinctively reach for the bonfire and the continuation rather than the dark. And Nito just sits there, at the bottom of everything, waiting, patient in the way that only things with dominion over time can afford to be patient. His servants, the Grave Lords, spread misfortune in the world in his name. The items associated with his covenant speak of fate and the divine authority of death, of the inevitability written into the bones of all living things. He does not struggle against the fading of the fire. He does not plot to extend his existence beyond its natural span. He waits because waiting is what the first of the dead does, and in the end, everything comes to the first of the dead. The Witch of Ozolith is a different kind of story. She is one of the original four, a woman who found a Lord's soul near the first flame, and became something extraordinary, wreathed in fire sorcery, commanding her daughters in the great firestorms that helped bring the dragons down. After the Dragon Wars, she did not go underground to a tomb or build a gleaming city of gold on a cliff above the world. She went deep. She built Izalith, her civilization, in a vast underground space, lit by the orange and red of her own flame magic. A city unlike Anor Londo in almost every way. Where Gwyn's city aspired toward light and height, Izalith was warm and intimate and earthen, a place that felt like it belonged in the world rather than above it. And for centuries, it worked. The witch and her daughters prospered. They developed their flame sorcery into something extraordinary, their power over fire making them perhaps the most directly dangerous of the Lord-bearing factions. Her daughters were all remarkable in their own right, 7 of them named in various item descriptions and encounters throughout the game and its sequels, each representing a different facet of the chaos fire their mother would eventually unleash. Here is where the tragedy begins. The first flame started to fade. Gwyn's response to this was to walk into the fire himself and offer his soul as fuel. The Witch of Izalith's response was different. She decided she could simply make a new one. This is either the most arrogant thing anyone does in the entire Dark Souls universe, or the most understandable, depending on how you look at it. She had a Lord Soul. She had mastered fire magic to a degree no one else could match. She had built a civilization on the power of flame, and the thing that threatened all of that was the fading of a fire. So she looked at her own Lord Soul, the accumulated power of something found in the deep dark near the original blaze, and she decided to use it as the seed of a new first flame, a backup, a replacement, a solution. It did not work. What happened instead was something the game calls the Flame of Chaos. When the Witch of Izalith tried to replicate the first flame using her own soul as the source material, the ritual failed in a way that was catastrophic and transformative, and in certain terrible ways, creative. The Flame of Chaos that erupted from her attempt was not the first flame. It was something twisted, something perverted, something that burned not with the clean authority of the original fire, but with something wilder and more monstrous. It consumed Izalith. It swept through the city and most of its people in an explosion of chaos fire that ended the civilization the witch had spent centuries building. And it took her. It took most of her daughters. Their bodies were subsumed into the flame of chaos, absorbed into something that the game calls the Bed of Chaos, a vast gnarled thing that eventually settled into the shape of a tree, its roots spreading through the ruins of lost Izalith, its branches reaching toward a ceiling it could never quite touch. The Bed of Chaos is the source of all demons. This is stated plainly in the item descriptions, and the implications are enormous. Every demon you fight in Dark Souls, every grotesque creature born of fire and chaos that wanders the ruins of Izalith and the demon ruins beneath Lordran, was born from the failed experiment of a god who loved fire so much she tried to recreate the thing that made her powerful and made something monstrously different instead. The demons are not evil in the way that word usually means. They are not deliberately cruel or malicious. They are the offspring of chaos, which means they are powerful and unpredictable and fundamentally at odds with the order Gwyn spent 1,000 years trying to maintain. The Capra demon, the Taurus demon, the Centipede demon, the demon fire sage, these are not characters with motivations. They are living fires, born from a catastrophe, burning with the energy of something that should never have existed. Most of the witch's daughters were not entirely destroyed. They were transformed. The eldest daughter, Quelag, escaped the full absorption into the Bed of Chaos, but not unscathed. She emerged as a half-demon, her lower body fused with a great spider, her upper body still recognizably human, brilliant and savage and desperately protective of her sister. That sister, who the game calls only the Fair Lady or the Daughter of Chaos, suffered even more severely. She absorbed so many of the parasitic eggs that came with the Chaos Fire that her body was nearly destroyed, and she spent the remaining centuries almost blind and nearly helpless, tended by Quelag and later by a small group of devoted humans who had pledged themselves to her service out of what can only be described as love. One daughter escaped entirely. Quelana of Izalith fled before the worst of the disaster, carrying with her the knowledge of flame sorcery and pyromancy that would eventually be taught to the world. She wanders the swamps near Blighttown for centuries, haunted by the fact that she alone survived intact. She did not save her mother. She did not save her sisters. She ran, and she knows it, and the knowledge sits with her the way all survivors' guilt does, heavy and unmoving and impossible to put down. There is a small, easily missed detail in the way Quelana speaks about her mother that captures something important about this whole story. She asks you not to bring up the Witch of Azalith. She says, please do not speak of her. The words carry a weight that goes beyond shame. They carry the weight of someone who watched the person she most admired in the world destroy everything they had built in a single moment of catastrophic ambition, and who has been living with that image ever since. The Bed of Chaos, when you eventually reach it in the game, is one of the most structurally strange boss encounters in the series. You do not fight it the way you fight other things. You chip away at its roots. You destroy the two spheres on either side that may or may not be two of the trapped daughters, and then you crawl into the center to destroy the insect-like thing, the remnant of the witch herself, curled at the root of everything she became. The room resets if you die, requiring you to repeat the destruction of the roots each time, which has led many players to find the encounter frustrating. But there is something in the design that feels intentional. The Bed of Chaos does not fight you cleanly. It spasms and thrashes and knocks you into pits. It is not controlled or purposeful. It is suffering, and it expresses that suffering outward at everything around it. When you finally destroy the Bed of Chaos, the demons begin to die. All of them. Without the source of their existence, the creatures born from chaos fire simply fade, one by one, like candles going out. By the time of Dark Souls 3, the demon race is nearly extinct. A few remain in the smoldering lake, and a boss encounter with the last of the demon princes, the old demon king, is one of the most quietly tragic fights in the entire series. He sits alone in a ruined chamber, surrounded by the bodies of demons who have already gone out. Their flames cold, his own fire guttering, burning himself just to stay warm in a world that has forgotten what his kind were. The old demon king is an old man who cannot stop being what he is. He fights fiercely with everything he has, but his fire is dying, and he knows it, and there is something in his posture, in the way the game frames him, that makes you feel that truth in your chest before you've swung a single weapon. This is the story of the Witch of Izalith and what she left behind. A civilization of ash, a nightmare born from a dream of fire, a race of creatures that never asked to exist and are dying because the thing that made them is gone. And underneath the demon ruins, frozen in time and in chaos fire, the thing that was once one of the 4 original discoverers of the Lord's souls sits in its roots and breathes and waits for someone to come and end its misery. The first mercy killing in Dark Souls is giving her that release. Section 4. The Undead Curse, the Dark Sign, and the Shape of Gwyn's Fear. There is a mark that appears on certain people's skin. It looks like a ring of fire, a dark circle burning cold against flesh, suggesting neither warmth nor light, but rather the absence of both. It is called the Dark Sign, and everyone who bears it is undead, and being undead in Lordran means something very specific and very terrible. It means you cannot die, or more precisely, it means you cannot stay dead. When an undead person is killed, they wake at the nearest bonfire, whole in body, but slightly less whole in self. Each death erodes something. The technical term in the game's language is humanity, that fragment of the dark soul that every human carries, but the experiential reality is simpler and sadder. Each time you die and return, you lose a little of who you are, your memories, your purpose, your emotional connections to the world, the fire that makes you a person rather than simply a body. And eventually, after enough deaths and enough erosion, you go hollow. You become a shuffling, purposeless thing, empty of everything except the animal impulse to keep moving and to lash out at whatever comes near. You are undead, but you are no longer really there. The horror of hollowing is not in what you become physically. Hollows, for the most part, look roughly human. They are thin and gray and move with the mechanical purposelessness of things that have forgotten what purpose feels like, but they are recognizable as having once been people. The horror is in the gap between the shell and what it used to contain. Every hollow you cut down in Undead Burg, or the catacombs, or wherever you encounter them, was once someone with a name, and a history, and a reason they set out from wherever they began. The undead curse took that from them. Death by death, choice by choice, the person eroded away until what was left was just the biological machinery with no operator. This is the curse of the dark sign, and it is relentless in a way that makes every other horror in Lordran seem almost manageable by comparison. The demons can be avoided, the dragons can be outrun, but the undead curse is inside you, and it does not stop. And the only things that hold it back are souls and humanity and the warmth of bonfires, and all of those things are finite and precious, and always in shorter supply than you need. There is a philosophical dimension to the hollowing that the game does not state directly, but that sits in the texture of every encounter. If each death takes something from you, if the accumulated weight of failure slowly empties you out, then what you are doing when you play Dark Souls is not just a mechanical challenge. It is a test of whether you can find your way forward without losing yourself in the process. The game is quite literally asking whether you can die enough times to win without becoming hollow in the process. Whether you can hold on to purpose and direction and the particular shape of who you are while the world keeps grinding at the edges of it. Most players will tell you that they got hollow a little along the way. Not in the game's mechanics, not losing their character's form, but in that particular kind of exhausted emptiness that comes from hitting a wall too many times in the same hour. Dark Souls knows this. It built the dark sign to mirror it. Now, here is the question that Darkstalker Kothy asks. In the quiet of New Londo, when you have gone far enough down into the darkness to reach him, why does the undead curse exist? The Way of White, the church organization most closely aligned with Gwyn's legacy, teaches that the dark sign is a natural consequence of the first flame fading, a sign that the world is in distress, a call to the worthy to find the Lord's souls and relight the fire. This is the story Gwyn wanted told. This is the mythology that has kept the cycle running for centuries, new generations of pilgrims and heroes and chosen undead making the same journey for the same reason, because they were told this is what the curse demands. But Kothy says something different. He says that the curse was created deliberately, as a mechanism of control. That Gwyn, afraid of what humanity's ascension would mean for his age, engineered the undead curse as a way of ensuring that the dark souls carried by every human being would keep being offered to the flame, rather than allowed to accumulate into the power that would naturally bring about the Age of Dark. The undead are not being cursed by a dying world. According to Kothy, they are being harvested. Their suffering is not incidental to Gwyn's plan. It is the plan. This is one of those pieces of Dark Souls lore that you can hold in your hands and turn over and find edges on every side. Kaathah is not trustworthy. He is a primordial serpent with his own agenda, and he has been maneuvering events toward an outcome that serves him just as much as Frampt has been maneuvering them in this other direction. But the thing about Kothy's version is that it makes a particular kind of sense when you look at what Gwyn actually did. He was afraid of the dark. He was afraid of humanity. He genuinely believed that the Age of Dark, the natural consequence of the fire fading, was something to be prevented at any cost. A god who was afraid enough to feed himself to a dying fire might well have been afraid enough to curse an entire species to keep their power from accumulating. Consider what the undead curse requires, mechanically and narratively. It requires the curse to seek humanity to avoid hollowing. It requires them to seek bonfires to rest and restore themselves. It routes their entire existence through the network of fire that Gwyn built, through the infrastructure of the Age of Fire, through the system that requires human participation to keep functioning. Every undead pilgrim who makes their way toward Lordran in search of the ancient rite of kindling, every chosen hero who accumulates Lord souls and descends to the kiln, is doing exactly what the mechanism of the curse was built to produce. Fuel for the flame, willing or unwilling, aware of it or not. The Undead Asylum, where the game begins, is both the starting point of your journey and one of the most eloquent images in the game's storytelling. You begin in a prison specifically built to house the undead, to keep them contained, separated from the world, locked away in a place where their hollowing cannot be someone else's problem. The inmates of the asylum were brought there by the undead curse, and are simply left, neither executed nor treated nor helped, just stored. The implication is that this is what Lordran does with its undead. It builds prisons for them, and then forgets they exist. The other kingdoms have their own versions of this management strategy. Drangleic exiles its undead to a far land, and tells them to seek the cure. Lothric places them in a cemetery of ash, and sets trials before them to determine which ones are worth using as tools. In every case, the underlying structure is the same. The undead exist. They are inconvenient. They are potentially useful. They are housed and sorted and sent on missions. And the missions are framed as noble purposes, and the framing keeps the system running because it gives the undead a reason to keep going that has nothing to do with the fact that they are being used. And then a mysterious knight opens your cell, drops a key to you through a hole in the ceiling, and everything begins. The bonfires are the emotional and mechanical heart of the game, and their lore is worth understanding. They are not natural fires. They are nodes of a network, each one connected to the first flame in Gwyn's original architecture of the world, lit by the humanity of the undead who rest at them. When you sit at a bonfire, you are feeding it. Not in a way that the game forces you to acknowledge, not with a menu or a resource cost, but your presence there, your humanity, is the fuel. The bonfires run on you. They always have. This gives the bonfire a moral dimension that the game does not explain, but that you can feel in the way it is handled. There is no moment of rest in Dark Souls that is truly free. Even the quiet of a bonfire is part of a system designed to extract from you what Gwyn needed to keep the fire burning. The warmth you feel when you sit down, that moment of safety in an unsafe world, is something Gwyn built not to protect you, but to use you. And knowing that does not stop it from being the most comforting thing in the world when you have been dying for an hour and finally find a new one. The way the Dark Sign interacts with souls is interesting too. Souls in Dark Souls are not merely experience points in a mechanical sense. They are the fundamental currency and the fundamental material of existence. Every being in the world has a soul. Stronger beings have stronger souls. When something dies, its soul disperses, and you absorb that soul. And the accumulation of souls makes you stronger in a way that suggests your own soul is growing or deepening. The game never quite explains the metaphysics of this, but the feeling of it is that you are becoming more through the deaths around you, more real, more capable, more present in a world that is trying to reduce everyone to absence. Lord Souls are the extreme end of this. They are the primordial concentrations of soul stuff, the originals from which everything else derives. Collecting them is the objective of the first game, and the locations where they are held are each a study in what a Lord Soul does to the person or entity that possesses it over a very long time. Nito's Lord Soul has made him a king of the dead, patient and still, and enormously powerful in his stillness. The Witch of Izalith's has become something chaotic and terrible, no longer serving a purpose she would recognize, just burning. Gwyn's is spread across multiple fragments, given to his children and allies, and the remainder is burning in the kiln. And the furtive pygmies is scattered across all of humanity in tiny pieces. And that scattering is both the most generous thing anyone did in this story, and the thing that made Gwyn most afraid. Because a scattered soul is hard to use. It cannot be harvested cleanly. It cannot be redirected by a god who wants to keep the fire burning. It lives in people, in choices, in the small daily accumulation of human will and desire and grief and love, and it grows towards something that is not the flame. Kayati calls it the Age of Dark, and he frames it as a good thing, the natural inheritance of humanity. Whether it is good or simply different is a question the game leaves open, as most of its most important questions are left open. What we know is this: the undead curse exists. People bear the dark sign and die and return and slowly hollow. Kingdoms have been built and abandoned around the problem. Asylums have been filled. Prophecies have been circulated about chosen undead who would resolve the cycle one way or another. And none of it has worked, not permanently, because you cannot permanently solve something that is written into the architecture of the world. The fire fades. It always fades, no matter how many people you feed into it. Section 5. Seath the Scaleless, the Duke's Archives, and the madness of immortality. There is a certain kind of ambition that is born not from strength, but from its absence. The hunger of someone who was told early that they lacked the thing that mattered most, and who spent their entire existence trying to find another way to have it. Seath the Scaleless is this kind of story, not a story of power corrupting, but of powerlessness transformed, over centuries, into something so obsessive and so consuming that it became its own kind of horror. He was born a dragon without stone scales. In a race defined by its stone-cold immortality, Seath arrived already mortal, already exceptional in the wrong direction, already marked as the one who did not have what everyone else was born with. The everlasting dragons did not die. This was their nature, their armor, their identity. Seath died, could die, would die eventually without intervention. And in a race of beings who had never learned to reckon with mortality because they never had to, being the mortal one was a kind of exile that never ended. He was brilliant. The item descriptions that come from weapons and spells derived from his research consistently acknowledge this. He did not merely study the arcane, he created an entirely new branch of knowledge, sorcery, as Lordran understands it, born from his investigation into the principles that gave the dragons their stone scales and his attempt to replicate them through magical means. He was the first sorcerer in a meaningful sense. Every mage who would follow, from the scholars of Vinheim to the students of Duke's Archives, builds on what Seath discovered in his paranoid, obsessive, endless research. When the Dragon Wars came, and Gwyn offered him recognition, a place in the New World, a dukedom and resources and the freedom to continue his work, Seath took it without hesitation. He told Gwyn where the dragons were most vulnerable. He guided the assault on his own kind, and if he felt anything about that, the game does not tell us. Perhaps he did not. Perhaps by then the wound of his birth had calcified into something that no longer felt like loss. Perhaps betrayal is simpler when you never felt you belonged to what you were betraying. Gwyn gave him a dukedom, which in practice meant a grand library, an archive, and all the resources he needed to pursue his research. He called it the Duke's Archives, and they are one of the most beautiful and most disturbing locations in Dark Souls. Enormous bookshelves rimming to impossible heights, a crystalline ocean beyond the windows, a vast telescope pointed at a sky full of things Seath was trying to understand. And in the lower levels, cages, experiments, prisoners. Because the thing about Seath's research into immortality was that it required subjects. You cannot understand the mechanism of the stone scales without comparing them to flesh that does not have them. You cannot refine a sorcery of crystallization without testing it on beings who can respond to it and suffer from it and change under it in ways you can observe. Seath did not consider this a moral problem. He had been the subject of the world's indifference for long enough that the distinction between experimenter and subject had lost whatever weight it might once have carried for him. His channelers, those long-limbed sorceress servants in blue, went out into Lordran to collect what he needed. Fair maidens, for reasons the game implies, were related to the properties of female life energy in his sorcery. Undead, because the undead cursed with the dark sign had interesting properties that a researcher obsessed with immortality would naturally find fascinating. They were brought back to the archives and they did not leave. The Pisaka, those screaming, distorted figures that haunt the lower chambers of the archives, were once women who came here for reasons we cannot reconstruct, and became something unintended and permanent. And then Seath found what he had been looking for his entire life. He found the primordial crystal. The primordial crystal was an artifact of immense age and power, and what it offered was exactly what its name implied: primordial immortality. By connecting his body and his soul to the crystal, Seath achieved what no mortal being in Lordran had ever achieved by any natural means. He became unkillable. His wounds closed as fast as they were opened. No weapon could touch him. No poison could accumulate. No fire could burn for long enough to matter. As long as the crystal existed, Seath was truly, completely, indestructibly immortal. He had found it. The one thing he had wanted since before he had words for wanting, and it destroyed him. Not in a single dramatic moment, not in a way that was visible from outside, but the records of scholars who interacted with him after the acquisition of the crystal suggest that something in Seath changed fundamentally in the years that followed. The paranoia that had always been present in him, the anxiety of a being who had always been aware of his own vulnerability, did not dissipate when the vulnerability was removed. It intensified, because now he had something worth protecting, something that could not be replaced, and protecting it meant isolating himself from anything that might threaten it. He locked himself in the archives. He stopped emerging. He sent his channelers further and further afield in search of more research material. He wrote in fragments, in languages he invented for the purpose, in cipher codes that only made sense within the context of his own accumulated obsessions. The scholar Big Hat Logan, who went to the archives voluntarily in search of Seath's knowledge, ended his days there naked and raving, having absorbed too much of something the archive contained. Not Seath's evil, Seath's madness. The specific insanity of a being who had lived too long with too much to lose. The first time you encounter Seath in the game, he kills you. There is no way to prevent this. You step into an arena and he is there, vast and pale and many-tailed, breathing a mist of crystals that petrifies flesh. And you die, and you wake in a cell in his prison. It is one of the game's most deliberate violations of expectation. You have fought many things by this point. You have died many times. But being killed and imprisoned, stripped of your agency in a way that combat does not do, puts you in the position of his other subjects, if only for a moment. When you find him again, deeper in the crystal cave beyond the archives, you destroy the primordial crystal first. This is the key. Without the crystal, he becomes mortal again, and for the first time in however long the crystal has kept him, Seath can be hurt. The moment you destroy it, his reaction is interesting. Not fear exactly, not rage, something closer to confusion, as if the possibility had so fully exited his conceptual framework that its arrival cannot be processed cleanly. He dies. Eventually he dies, and Gwyn's gift of a fragment of his lord's soul is released, and you take it, and the Duke's archives are left in silence with their cages and their pages and their crystallized prisoners who cannot be reached. Seath's legacy is not his sorcery, though the sorcery was real and significant. It is the example of what immortality does to a mind that was not built for it. The thing he wanted most became the thing that unmade him most completely, because having nothing to lose turned out to be just as destructive as having nothing to protect. Gwyn was afraid of the dark. Seath was afraid of dying. They both fought against the thing they feared with everything they had, and they both ended up as monuments to the thing they couldn't escape. One is a hollow shell guarding dead embers. The other is a crystalline madman in a palace of his own making, unable to stop, unable to rest, immortal and emptied. The Moonlight Greatsword, which you can obtain by cutting off Seath's tail, glows with blue-white light in a way that is beautiful in the abstract. But knowing where it came from, knowing the creature who grew it, and the obsession that creature represented, the beauty sits differently. It is a beautiful thing, made from something that was broken a very long time ago. Section 6. Night Artorias, the Abyss, and the Great Grey Wolf Sif. There is a grave in the Darkroot Garden that is sealed with magic old enough that the inscription is worn past reading. The forest around it has grown thick and strange, animated by something between nature and something older than nature. And guarding that grave, sitting watch over the bones of a hero she cannot forget, is a wolf the size of a small house, with a great sword clenched in her jaws that she has no right to be able to carry, and carries with a grief that is visible in every movement. Her name is Sif. The grave is Artorias's. The story of Knight Artorias is one of the most complete tragedies in Dark Souls, which is saying something in a universe built from tragedies. It is a story about the limits of strength, about what happens when the most capable person in a room confronts something that strength alone cannot defeat, and about what loyalty looks like when it outlasts the person it is owed to. Artorias was one of Gwyn's 4 knights, the one who wore the blue-gray cape and carried an enormous greatsword, and had what the game describes as an unbendable will of steel. He was not just powerful in the physical sense, though he was extraordinarily powerful in the physical sense. He was the kind of warrior whose legend grows beyond their actual accomplishments, because the quality of their dedication is so rare that people feel it and remember it long after the specific details of what they did have faded. Centuries after his death, young fighters were forming orders in his name. The Undead Legion of Farron, the Abyss Watchers of Dark Souls 3, took his wolf imagery and his mission against the dark, and built an entire identity around the idea of what he represented. What he represented was someone who would go where no one else would go, and do what no one else could do without asking anything in return. The abyss is the dark equivalent of the flame. Where the first flame represents the light and heat and life of the Age of Fire, the abyss is the dark that was always there before and between and beyond the fire, the primordial nothing that existed when the Age of Ancients was the whole of the world. In small quantities, the abyss is simply darkness, the natural shadow that exists wherever light does not reach. But when it concentrates, when something draws it together and gives it a direction, it becomes something actively hostile to human existence. It does not consume flesh. It consumes humanity, that fundamental fragment of the dark soul, draining it from anyone who stands in it too long and leaving behind a hollowed shell. New Londo was the first city touched by the abyss in a meaningful way. It was a human kingdom, built at Gwyn's encouragement, its 4 kings chosen for their wisdom and governance. Gwyn granted them great power, a fragment of his own soul, to help them rule well. And then Darkstalker Kothi came to them, as he came to many, offering them a different kind of power, a power of the dark, a power that grew from the fragment of the dark soul that each of them carried as a human being. They listened, they drank from the dark, and the dark consumed them, and New Londo with them. And when Artorias first traveled to those flooded ruins, it was to try to contain what had been unleashed. He learned to walk in the abyss. This is the remarkable thing, the thing that earned him his title. He made a covenant, the details of which are lost, but the nature of which involved binding something of the dark to himself willingly, and through that covenant he could move through the abyss without being unmade by it. He was the Abyss Walker, the only one. No one else had ever managed it. When the human kingdom of Oolacile fell to a different abyss, one born from the deliberate excavation of an ancient grave, Artorias went. Oolacile was a civilization with its own relationship to the dark, practitioners of golden sorcery who were manipulated by a primordial serpent, almost certainly Kothi, into digging into the resting place of something they should have left alone. The ancient primordial human they unearthed, known as Manus, father of the abyss, had been buried deep and forgotten, and disturbing him released a darkness that transformed Oolacile's people into something broken and terrible. Artorias went to save Princess Dusk of Oolacile and to stop the abyss from spreading. He took Sif with him, because Sif went everywhere with him, a bond that had grown over years of battle into something that could not be put into words except that it was clear in every moment. He lost. The details of Artorias' defeat are reconstructible from the DLC chapter of the first game, where the chosen undead travels back in time to Oolacile and sees what actually happened, rather than the legend that was told about it afterward. Artorias fought Manus, the primeval father of the abyss, and Manus was too strong. He could walk in the abyss, yes, but Manus was the abyss, or something close to it, a concentration of dark and ancient grief, and something that might be love turned to possession, and Artorias could not overcome it with will alone. His left arm was broken. He fell. Manus himself deserves more than a brief mention. He was a human. This is the thing the game drops quietly and lets you sit with. The father of the abyss, the entity that destroyed Oolacile, the darkness at the heart of one of the most terrifying locations in the DLC, was a person once, an ancient person, buried so deep in the roots of the old civilization that by the time anyone dug him up, the concept of what he had been was lost. He was a primeval human, the game says, driven to madness by the wild humanity that consumed him when he was disturbed. There is an item called Manus's Catalyst that describes him as the primeval human. Not a god, not a beast, not anything cosmic. A person. One of the first, or close to the first, someone who lived in the early days of humanity when the dark souls in people were newer and perhaps less contained. When Oolacile's citizens dug him up at the urging of Kothi, they disturbed something that had been buried for a reason. Not because Manus was evil, but because the darkness in him was raw and unfiltered in a way that people who had lived for thousands of years under Gwyn's fire did not have the immunity to withstand. The tragedy of Manus is that his actions in Oolacile are not villainous in the traditional sense. He is not destroying for the pleasure of it. He is reaching. His boss fight includes a search for something, for a fragment of himself that he lost, and that search is relentless and desperate, and not cruel in its intent even if it is devastating in its effect. He is a person looking for something he cannot name, in a dark he cannot escape, with power he cannot control, and the world around him burns because it cannot withstand the proximity to what he is. His defeat at the hands of the chosen undead is the end of one story and the beginning of another, because Manas's shattered essence becomes Nashandra and her siblings, the Children of Dark, who will go on to complicate the world of Dark Souls 2 for centuries. The darkness does not simply end when Manas is defeated. It disperses, takes new forms, finds new expressions in beings who want what he wanted, but are small enough to pursue it with strategy, rather than raw force. His left arm was broken. He fell. His last act, before the darkness took his mind entirely, was to use his great shield to raise a barrier around Seath, a dome of magic covering the wolf, keeping the abyss out, protecting his companion from the corruption that he himself could not escape. He sacrificed the use of his only defense to save her, and then the abyss got in, and what had been Artorias became something that moved with beastly unpredictability and attacked whatever came near, a husk of the night the legend had been built around. When the chosen undead encounters Artorias in Oolacile, what they fight is not a villain, it is a tragedy given motion. The blue-gray cape is tattered and dark. The armor is corroded by something that looks like decay. The arm he sacrificed his shield to protect hangs useless at his side. He fights with one arm, leaping and spinning with a ferocity that speaks less to skill than to desperation. The combat instincts of a lifetime, compressed into pure aggression by the loss of everything that guided them. There is a moment when you defeat him, when something comes back. A fragment of Artorias surfaces through the corruptions for just long enough for him to recognize what he became. His final words ask for forgiveness from Seath and everyone else. He says he availed them nothing, and then it's over, and the knight who was once the greatest in Lordran is at rest, and the legend that would outlive him by centuries is built on the kindness of the chosen undead, who let the world believe Artorias defeated the abyss, rather than the truth, which is that he was destroyed by it. Seath, freed by Artorias' barrier and eventually escaping Oolacile, returns to her master's grave. She picks up his sword and she stays. She stays for what appears to be centuries. Visitors come to the Darkroot Garden looking for the grave, looking for the ring of Artorias that grants the ability to walk in the abyss as he once did. None of them come back, said to be easy prey for local bandits. But the implication is that Seath is the reason. She fights everyone who comes near, not out of aggression, out of grief. Because the only way she knows to honor what she could not protect is to keep protecting what's left of it. When you fight Seath, if you have completed the DLC before reaching her in the base game, there is an additional cutscene. She recognizes the chosen undead. She has seen them before, in the past of Oolacile, fighting alongside Artorias, trying to do what Artorias himself could not. And she hesitates. She limps towards you and stops, and you can see in the slowness of her movements that she does not want this fight. She does not want to hurt the person who once helped her master. But the sword is his sword, and the grave is his grave, and she will protect it even from people she recognizes as allies, because this is what she has, and she will not let it be taken. As the battle goes on and she takes damage, she begins to limp more noticeably. Her movements slow, she drags her back legs. And still she keeps fighting, with the stubbornness of a being who was taught by example that you do not give up, that the measure of a guardian is how long they remain standing. That loyalty is not a fair-weather thing. She was taught this by someone who gave everything he had protecting her, and she learned the lesson completely. When she dies, the game gives you a soul. The description of what you can make from it names Artorias, as if she carried him inside her all that time. This is what love looks like in Lordran, not grand declarations or romantic gestures. A wolf standing at a grave carrying a sword too large for her, waiting for someone to come and make her stop. Section 7. The Painted World of Ariamis, Gwyndolin, and the Gods' Secrets. Here is how you find the Painted World of Ariamis. You go to the Undead Asylum, the prison where you began the game, but you return to it rather than simply leaving it. Somewhere in the cell where you first woke up, easy to miss the first time because you were just trying to escape, is a small doll. Peculiar is the word the game uses for it. You take it, and you do not know why yet, and you carry it forward. Later, in Anor Londo, you find yourself in a great chapel, and there is a painting. Not a small painting. An enormous canvas depicting a cold, snow-covered world, gray and pale, and somehow beautiful, with the quality of somewhere that exists just slightly outside of normal time. And if you approach it with the doll in your pocket, something happens. You do not walk into the painting so much as the painting takes you. The world bleaches white, and then you are somewhere else. The item description of the doll reads, "There once was an abomination who had no place in this world. She clutched this doll tightly, and eventually was drawn into a cold and lonely painted world. That abomination is crossbreed Priscilla, and the cold and lonely painted world is where the gods of Anor Londo put her, because they did not know what else to do with something that frightened them." Let's talk about the gods' secrets first, because Anor Londo is built on them. The entire city that you encounter in Dark Souls, gleaming and golden and sun-drenched, is a construction, a very elaborate, very expensive, very intentionally maintained illusion. When Gwyn left with his knights to link the first flame, the other gods scattered. Guinevere, beloved princess of sunlight, left to live in another land entirely, marrying another divine figure and building a new life, or from the fading city her father had left behind. The silver knights who had filled the halls began to dwindle. The warmth and light of the city's famous sunlight dimmed. Anne Gwyndolin, Gwyn's youngest child, who had been raised as a daughter but was in every biological sense a son, who had an affinity for the moon and for illusion magic that set him apart from everything Gwyn had stood for, stayed. Gwyndolin could not let the city fall, whether this was loyalty to his father or devotion to the system his father had built, or simply the inertia of someone who had no other home. He stayed, and he used his illusion magic to make the city look like it still worked. The sunlight is his magic. The image of Guinevere, the enormous glowing woman who gives you the Lord Vessel and tells you to link the fire, is his creation, a projection shaped like his sister, saying the things his sister would say, maintaining the fiction that the Age of Fire still has its gods behind it. When you kill Gwyndolin's Guinevere, the illusion shatters. The sunlight dies. The city around you goes dark, cold, gray, revealing what it actually is beneath the construction. And Gwyndolin, who has been hiding in the dark beneath a statue of his father, becomes hostile because you have done the one thing he could not allow. You have shown the truth. There is something deeply affecting about Gwyndolin when you look at him fully. He is a person shaped by his father's choices, raised as something he was not, tasked with maintaining a lie he did not choose, in a city everyone else abandoned. He has the power of the Dark Moon and commands an organization of divine punishment, the Blades of the Dark Moon, who hunt those who sin against the gods. But the god he is punishing on behalf of, the father he is maintaining the image of, left him behind, built the city and then walked away from it, and Gwyndolin has been holding it together with illusions ever since, because the alternative is admitting that the city of gods is empty. By the time of Dark Souls 3, Gwyndolin has been eaten alive, not metaphorically. Aldrich, Saint of the Deep, one of the Lords of Cinder who we will spend more time with in a later chapter, consumed Gwyndolin as part of his vision of an age of the deep sea. He absorbed the young god slowly, over what may have been a very long time, while Gwyndolin's Dark Moon followers maintained the fiction that he was still in his chamber, merely indisposed, merely ill. By the time the Ashen One reaches him, he is a presence within Aldrich's form, still faintly conscious, still faintly there, and when the battle begins, you can see the suggestion of his arms emerging from Aldrich's fluid body, grasping in the way of someone trying to pull themselves free from something they have been inside for too long. This is what happens to the last of the gods. Now to Priscilla. The painted world of Ariamis is a strange place. It is cold and abandoned and beautiful in the way that things preserved by isolation are sometimes beautiful, a world kept from decay by the fact that nothing has touched it in so long that decay forgot it existed. The enemies there are unsettling, phalanx creatures made of eyes and tentacles pressed together into humanoid shapes, Corvian knights with their crow imagery and their sadness, small rat-like things, half-formed people who seem to have been abandoned midway through becoming something else. And at the end of it all, in a place that would be a boss arena if its occupant were interested in being a boss, is Priscilla. She is enormous. 5 meters tall at minimum, pale as the snow outside, with white hair and a reptilian elegance and a great scythe, and, if you look closely, scales along her neck and face that tell you where half of her heritage came from. She is a crossbreed, half dragon by most accounts, and the dragon half is almost certainly Seath. The other half is debated, with the most compelling evidence pointing toward Velka, the heretical goddess of sin who appears in Dark Souls 1 primarily through the items connected to her and the occult power she distributed to her priests. This parentage matters because of what it produced. Priscilla's body is naturally infused with what the game calls occult power, and occult weapons are significant because they are especially effective against the gods of Anor Londo. Gwyn and his kind are not strong against occult damage. They are in fact quite weak to it, which is why the weapons of that type were sealed away, hidden in the painted world, treated as forbidden technology, and Priscilla herself, by simply existing, embodied the same danger. Her life-hunting ability, the power of her scythe, drains the life from those she strikes in a way that divine immunity does not protect against. She could hurt the gods. She was, in her body chemistry, a natural threat to the order Gwyn had built, so they put her in a painting. Not cruelly exactly, by the standards of how people are treated in this world. The painter who made the world, Ariamis, seems to have intended it as a kindness, a place of seclusion rather than punishment. A world Priscilla could inhabit without being a problem for anyone, and without anyone being a problem for her. But the intention does not change the reality. She is in there, and she cannot leave without help. And by the time you reach her, she has been in there long enough that she does not quite remember what it would mean to leave. When you speak to her, she asks you to depart in peace. She does not want to fight you. She asks only to be left alone in her cold world. The words are simple, and they carry everything. She is not angry, not resentful, not plotting anything. She is just a person who was put somewhere because she was inconvenient, and who has made her peace with that because she had no other choice. If you take the exit she offers, jumping off the ledge behind her, you are transported back to Anor Londo without a fight. You can leave her there. The game does not require you to harm her. If you do attack her, she fights with the scythe and the ability to turn completely invisible in a blizzard she summons. The invisibility is eerie and effective. You are swinging at nothing, tracking movements in the snow, looking for the blade before it finds you. And when she speaks, if she manages to kill you, she says, "Why could thou not let us be? Didst thou not see why Ariamis created this world?" She is not wrong. The world was made so she could have peace. You broke into it looking for things to collect or challenges to overcome, because you are an undead moving through a world of secrets, and you do not always stop to ask whether the secret wants to be found. This is not a condemnation. It is the nature of the game. But Priscilla's question hangs in the air after it's asked, and it has an answer, and the answer does not entirely reflect well on anyone who chose to fight her. In Dark Souls 3, there is a small painted world, a work in progress created by a young painter who appears to have some connection to Priscilla in her features and her voice and her gentleness. She is painting something new, something cold and dark, a world for all things that don't have a place in the world outside. She says she needs just a little flame, just enough to paint the cold, and the way she says it suggests she knows what she's talking about, that cold and warmth are not opposites but partners, and that the world she is making will have room for things that the Shining Cities never made room for. Her name is not given. She is called only the Painter, but the echo of Priscilla in her is unmistakable. And what she is doing, building a world for the unwanted out of nothing but paint and a small piece of flame, is one of the few genuinely hopeful acts in all three games. She is not trying to relight the first flame, or prevent the Age of Dark, or forge a cycle that benefits a dying class of gods. She is just making somewhere warm and real for the people who need it. That small painting, that small act of creation in the ruins of everything else, is the thing I keep returning to when I think about what Dark Souls ultimately believes. It is not a nihilistic series, despite everything. It is a series about the costs of holding on, which is different from a series about the futility of caring. The painter cares, and she builds. Section 8, Ash Lake, the Forgotten Dragons, and the Primordial Serpents. There is a place at the very bottom of Dark Souls, accessible through a hidden passage in Blight Town, that almost no one finds on their first playthrough, and that almost everyone who does find it has a particular kind of reaction to. The passage is narrow and unmarked. Nothing about it suggests it leads anywhere significant, and yet at the end of it, the game opens up into a space so different from everything else that it feels less like a new location and more like stepping out of the game entirely and into something older. Ash Lake is a vast, still expanse of shallow water beneath an infinite ceiling of pale stone. Enormous ancient trees rise from the water, the largest examples of the arched trees, rooted in the rock of the world's floor. their crowns somewhere so high above you that you cannot see them. The light is gray and directionless. There is no warmth here, no bonfire close enough to feel, just the silence of water and stone that has not changed since before the first flame existed. The route to it deserves description because the route is part of its meaning. You find the passage in Blighttown, which is one of the most hostile and unpleasant environments in the game, a tangle of wooden scaffolding and toxic swamp and enormous parasitic creatures that drop from above. Everything about Blighttown is wrong and uncomfortable and difficult, and somewhere in that wrongness, barely visible, is a trunk of an arch tree, hollowed out, just wide enough to pass through. Inside the tree, spiraling downward, is a passage that takes you further from everything you have been doing and further from everything the game wants you to think about. When you emerge from the tree into Ash Lake, the contrast is absolute. The hostility is gone. The wrongness is gone. Everything is still and gray and enormous and ancient, and the sound design shifts to something almost musical, a faint resonant tone that is less a sound than a feeling, the way certain kinds of silence have a note in them. You are standing somewhere that predates every conflict you have been fighting. You are standing in the Age of Ancients, or as close to it as the living world can offer, and in the shallows, moving slowly, is a hydra. And further along, past the hydra, lying in the water with the patience of something that has been there forever, is a stone dragon. This is the last everlasting dragon, or something close to one anyway. The remnant of the race that ruled the gray world before fire changed everything. It lies still as the stone it is made of, watching with eyes that have watched everything that has happened to the world since the first flame, and it says nothing. If you sit with it long enough, it will teach you the path of the dragon gesture, an acknowledgement of something between you, a recognition that you have come to this deep and quiet place, and found what was here before everything you know. The gesture itself is interesting. You lower yourself to one knee and extend one arm, palm out, in an attitude somewhere between a bow and a meditation posture, and you breathe out slowly. It is not a combat gesture. It is not a victory pose. It is a posture of recognition, of humility in the presence of something older and stranger than you, of willingness to sit still in a world that has not required stillness from anything for a very long time. There is a covenant associated with the everlasting dragons, and joining it requires a particular kind of dedication that most players never pursue. The path of the dragon asks you to reach toward what the dragons were, to aspire to their unchanging permanence, to try to become something close to stone. In a game about souls and fire and the constant churn of death and rebirth, the path of the dragon offers something different: stillness, the absence of the cycle, just being without becoming. It does not fit the world as Gwyn made it. That is exactly the point. You can spend a long time in Ash Lake, longer than the game rewards you for spending, because there is very little to find there that advances your objectives. What there is the experience of a world that existed before objectives. A world that did not ask anything of you and did not want anything from you, and would continue to exist long after you left without noticing that you had been there. The stone dragon's presence at the center of all that stillness is not passive in the way that a sleeping creature is passive. It is passive in the way that a mountain is passive, fully present, fully itself, fully indifferent to whether it is observed or not. In a game built on observation, built on the premise that paying attention to the world around you is both the mechanical challenge and the narrative reward, Ash Lake is the place that teaches you what it feels like to be in the presence of something that does not want to be observed and does not need you to understand it. The stone dragon will share its gesture with you. It will offer you a covenant if you bring the right offering, but it will not explain itself, and it will not care whether you stay or go, and when the fire finally goes out and the last kingdom falls to ash, it will still be there, patient as stone, breathing with the slow rhythm of something that never learned to hurry. The primordial serpents are the other old things, and they are nothing like the dragons in nature or intent. Frampt and Kyathi, the two we meet directly, are vast serpentine beings with human-like faces who have been watching human affairs for a very long time and nudging them in directions they prefer. They speak smoothly, with the practiced fluency of beings who have spoken to very many people over a very long time and learned exactly what words open doors. Frampt presents himself as Gwyn's ally and the friend of humanity. He calls himself King Seeker Frampt, and his function seems to be identifying the chosen undead and pointing them toward the kiln of the first flame. He is charming in his enormous, slightly unnerving way, nestled in the depths of Firelink's shrine, calling you dear friend and explaining at length why you should link the fire and continue the Age of Fire and serve the legacy of a god who destroyed himself to keep the flame burning. He has been doing this for a very long time. Framp's presence at Firelink suggests that he has been stationed there, waiting, through multiple cycles of chosen undead making their pilgrimages. He has watched people undertake the same journey and make the same choice and burn themselves in the same fire, cycle after cycle, and he maintains his enthusiasm for each new arrival with a consistency that is either genuine or so practiced as to be indistinguishable from genuine. Whether Framp believes in what he is doing or is simply executing the last instructions of a god he served, we cannot say, but his dedication to the task is absolute. Keathi presents himself as the enemy of Gwyn's order and the true friend of humanity. He is found not in the easily accessible places, but in New Londo, the flooded city of the dead, accessible only after draining the floodwater and crossing into places where the four kings once ruled, and the darkness they fell into still lingers. He tells you things that contradict everything Frampt said. He says the linking of the fire is a lie perpetuated by a frightened god. He says you should not link the fire, that the Age of Dark is humanity's birthright, and that accepting it is the courageous act. And crucially, Keathi's version of events is not simply wrong. The history he describes, the deliberate manipulation of humanity through the undead curse, the suppression of the Dark Soul's natural accumulation, these things are supported by the evidence you can find across Lordran if you pay attention. He is telling you things that are at least partially true, filtered through his own interests and his own agenda, shaped by what he wants you to do. He is using the truth as a tool, which is perhaps more dangerous than using a lie because it is harder to dismiss. The fundamental problem with both serpents is this: they are very old, they have very specific goals, and their relationship with you is instrumental. You are not a person to them. You are an opportunity, a powerful undead who has come far enough to be useful, who has accumulated enough souls and enough capability to potentially make the choice that moves history in the direction they prefer. This is not cruelty. It is simply what they are. Very old beings working toward very long-term goals, and you are a lever. You are the hero in this story, and both of your primary advisors are working an angle, and you will not be told this directly. You have to figure it out from the texture of their speech, from the way they each tell you exactly what you need to hear to do what they want, from the gaps between what they say and what the world shows you. This is Dark Souls' relationship with its characters in miniature. No one is fully trustworthy. Everyone is operating with information you do not have. The truth is somewhere between the stories being told about it, and finding it requires paying attention to everything. Ash Lake is the one place in the game where neither serpent's agenda is present. It predates both of them. It predates the First Flame and the Dragon Wars and the Lord Souls and everything that followed. It is simply what was before any of this, and it will be here, quiet and patient in its gray water, after the last bonfire goes dark. Section 9. The Kingdom of Drangleic, King Vendrick, and Nashandra's Deception. Imagine building a kingdom, not inheriting one, not seizing one from a predecessor, but genuinely building it from the ruins of what came before, sorting through the ash of civilizations that had already burned, and finding the foundations that could still hold weight. Vendrick did this. With his brother Aldea, he found the ruins of Lordran, or what was closest to it, and he built Drangleic on the principle that this time, maybe, someone could figure out how to make it work. He was not wrong to try. He was not wrong in his ambitions. He made one mistake, and it was large enough to cost him everything, but it was a mistake born from love, which is perhaps the most painful kind. He trusted someone who saw him very clearly and chose to use exactly what she saw. Dark Souls 2 takes place in a world that is unmistakably later than the world of the first game, though how much later is difficult to say precisely. The geography is different, the civilizations are different. Lordran does not exist anymore as a functioning kingdom. What exists instead is Drangleic, a nation built in the same general region by a king who had done his research and understood, better than most, the nature of the cycle he was inheriting. Vendrick knew about the undead curse. He knew about the First Flame. He knew the pattern. Kingdoms rise, fire fades, undead curse spreads, kingdom falls, repeat. His approach to this problem was to seek souls of exceptional power, to accumulate the kind of cosmic resources that might let him break the cycle rather than just delay it again. He and his brother Aldea, a scholar of extraordinary ambition and deeply unsettling methods, both pursued knowledge about the fundamental structures of the world in ways that put them in conflict as much as in partnership. And then Nashandra came. She came alone, from a faraway land, beautiful in the way that demands attention, and she warned Vendrick of a looming threat from across the sea. The giants, she said, were building toward something. They were a danger to Drangleic. They needed to be dealt with before they could become a crisis. She said this with the certainty of someone who had thought it through, who had information he did not have, who was offering him her knowledge out of loyalty and love. What Nashandra was, in truth, was a fragment of Manus. When the Father of the Abyss was defeated in Oolacile, he did not simply cease to exist. He was destroyed, yes, but the concentrated darkness that comprised him shattered into fragments, and those fragments developed consciousness over the centuries, becoming the children of dark, beings made of pure dark hunger, taking human shapes and pursuing the things they lacked. Nashandra was the smallest of these fragments and the first to develop awareness. And because she was small, she was hungry, in a way that nothing small and hungry and aware can avoid being. She wanted the power she did not have, the first flame, and the soul of a king powerful enough to reach it. The war Vendrick fought against the giants, at Nashandra's urging, was real. The giants were real. The campaign across the sea was real and successful, and Vendrick returned with a prize, some artifact of significant power that the giants desperately wanted back. They came for it. The war lasted generations, exhausting Drangleic, costing lives the kingdom could not afford to lose. And when the undead curse followed the war, spreading through the surviving population, Vendrick finally understood. He looked at the woman he had trusted with everything and saw what she was. A fragment of the abyss in a beautiful shape, using him the way darkness uses everything, drawing on the warmth around it without giving anything back. And by then it was too late to undo what he had done, but not too late to prevent her from getting what she came for. He spent his last years of clarity building obstacles, safeguards, systems designed to ensure that Nashandra could not reach the throne of want, where the power to link or extinguish the first flame resided. He stripped himself of his own soul and placed it somewhere she could not easily reach. He retreated to the undead crypt with his most loyal guardian, Velstadt, and he let himself go hollow, because a hollow king had nothing left to take. When the bearer of the curse finds him in the undead crypt, Vendrick shuffles through the circular chamber with the slow purpose of something that has been walking the same path for so long that the floor has worn grooves. He wears his crown still. He carries his sword. He does not attack unless provoked, but his defenses are extraordinary, because even in hollowing, he retains some fundamental strength that the ages could not entirely erode. He is enormously difficult to damage without the giant souls that reduce his defense, a mechanic that makes a kind of narrative sense. To damage Vendrick, you need to carry pieces of the people his actions destroyed, the giants whose land he invaded, whose artifact he stole, whose invasion he repelled. Their memory weakens him. In the DLC content of Dark Souls 2, you can use a special artifact to enter the memory of the king, a preserved moment of who Vendrick was before the hollowing. And there, in that memory, he speaks. He says he is no king. He says he is more fit to be a jester. He says, "I am Drangleic," and what he means is that the kingdom and the man have become the same thing, both ruined, both hollowed, both still standing because they forgot how to fall. His advice, when you press him, is not to link the fire. He has done the research. He knows the cycle. He tells you to seek a third path, beyond light and dark, something his brother Aldea has also been pursuing through methods considerably more extreme. He does not tell you what that third path is. He is not sure it exists, but he is sure the old answers are wrong, and the certainty in his voice, even in memory, even in the shape of a man who has lost everything, suggests that this is the one thing he is still certain about. Nashandra, in the end, is fought as the final boss of the base game. She appears as a skeletal figure in a massive form, wielding curse and 4 black fountains that spread around her, her body half beautiful and half corruption. the pretty face of a fragment of pure want that has finally gotten close enough to its goal to reach for it. She uses the bearer of the curse just as she used Vendrick, directing them to clear the path to the throne of want and then moving to take it herself. She does not succeed because you are there to stop her, but the attempt itself is honest in a way that Nashandra's deceptions were not. She is not pretending anymore. She is just darkness wanting what it always wanted, dressed finely in its own shape. Dark Souls 2's story is often underappreciated in conversations about the series, partly because the game itself has mechanical quirks that divided players, and partly because its lore feels more dispersed and harder to assemble than the first or third game. But the heart of it, the story of a good man who loved the wrong person and paid for it across the entire arc of his reign, is genuinely affecting. Vendrick was trying to do what everyone in this universe is trying to do: find a way out of the cycle that does not simply require more sacrifice. He did not succeed, but he got further than most. Aldea, his brother, got further still, at a price that is perhaps even harder to look at. Aldea's keep, hidden away from the main path of Drangleic, is a place of experiments that were not gentle. Giant prisoners in cells, dragon eggs in incubators, creatures that suggest a mind willing to do whatever knowledge required, asking permission from nothing and no one. Aldea burned through his own flesh in the course of his research, burned through conventional existence. And what came out the other side was something that the game describes as not quite dead and not quite alive. A being of fire and knowledge that has been freed of most of the constraints that apply to people, but also freed of most of the things that make a person feel like a person. When he speaks to you, if you have done what is necessary to make him speak, his words are not comforting, but they are honest. He says he found that there is no path beyond the cycle, that every road leads back to fire or dark, flame or ash, and neither is an exit. The best that can be done, in his view, is to face what is true without flinching, to walk toward it with eyes open rather than being carried into it blind. This is not hope. It is something more like dignity. The difference between someone who is lost and knows it and someone who is lost and does not. The bearers of the curse in Dark Souls 2 are anonymous in a way that the chosen undead of the first game is also anonymous, but more deliberately so. The bearer of the curse has no name, no origin, no established identity. They arrive in Drangleic as someone so thoroughly hollowed by the curse that they cannot remember who they were before. And the entire arc of the game is them accumulating enough souls, enough memory, enough substance to become a person again. This frames the mechanical action of collecting souls and leveling up as an act of self-reconstruction. You are not growing stronger, you are growing back. This is perhaps the most personal interpretation of the soul mechanic across the entire series. In the first game, souls are power. In Dark Souls 3, souls are legacy, the accumulated weight of civilizations past. In Dark Souls 2, souls are identity. They are what makes you real. And the story of Vendrick and Nashandra and the kingdom they built and destroyed is the backdrop against which you reconstruct yourself. A mirror showing you what it looks like when someone has everything and loses it all to the wrong kind of love. There is a line from Vendrick in The Memory of the King that deserves to close out his story. He says that he sought fire, that he coveted the throne, that he built Drangleic on the bones of what came before. He is not apologizing for any of it. He is simply stating it plainly, in the way of someone who has had a very long time to look at what he did, and decide that the looking is all he has left. He says he is no king. He says he is more fit to be a jester. And in that self-assessment, in the quiet honesty of a man who has been hollow for decades and still remembers enough to be ashamed, there is something that feels more real than any of the grand gestures and legendary sacrifices this story is otherwise built from. He was a person who made choices. Some of them were good, some of them were catastrophic. And by the end, he knew the difference. Vendrick was trying to do what everyone in this universe is trying to do: find a way out of the cycle that does not simply require more sacrifice. He did not succeed, but he got further than most. Section 10. The Ringed City, Slave Knight Gale, and the End of Everything. Before we arrive at the end of the world, we need to spend a moment with the people who were supposed to prevent it from needing an end. The The Dark Souls 3 world is the most explicitly exhausted version of Lordran, a world that has run the cycle so many times that the landmarks of previous cycles are visible in the architecture. You can walk through places that were once Lordran and see the bones of the first game still present, repurposed, recontextualized, still there the way old walls are still there in a city that has been rebuilt 4 times on the same ground. This is intentional. Dark Souls 3 is asking you to recognize where you are, to feel the weight of repetition, to understand that you are not a new arrival in a young world, but the latest in a very long line of attempts. The Lords of Cinder are 5 people who linked the flame before, and are now being called back by the dying world to do it again. They were raised from their graves by a tolling bell, unearthed, given back their form, and asked to return to their thrones and do what they did before. One more time, one more cycle, and almost all of them refused. The Abyss Watchers fought themselves into madness. Yhorm sat in the ruins of the civilization he could not save. Aldrich went to Anor Londo with a very different agenda. Lothric sat with his broken twin and said no. Aldrich is perhaps the most disturbing of them. He was a cleric, a holy man, and through some process that the game's item descriptions describe as a genuine religious vision, he decided that devouring people was sacred, not metaphorically, literally. He ate people. He became so enormous with souls, so swollen with the accumulated substance of the people he had consumed, that the church he inspired decided he was holy enough to be used as a lord of cinder. They carried him to the kiln, and he linked the flame, and when he emerged he had a vision, a sea of darkness spreading from the deep, an age of the deep sea coming. And he began moving toward Anor Londo, toward the gods, because in his vision they were next. The deacons of the deep, his followers, were once good clerics who simply went bad by increments, each step seeming justifiable in context, until you look back and realize how far you have come from where you started. They still wear the robes of holy men. They still hold their tomes. They serve something their founders would not recognize, and they do it with the earnest conviction of people who believe they are still on the right side. This is one of the things Dark Souls understands most clearly about institutional corruption. It almost never announces itself. It moves in small, reasonable-sounding steps, and by the time the step you are on looks like the one that started the slide, you are already too far down to easily reverse. The Abyss Watchers carry Artorias' legacy forward in the saddest possible way. They partook of the blood of an ancient wolf, specifically connecting themselves to the memory of Seath, and by extension to Artorias, and made his mission their mission: guard against the abyss, keep the dark from spreading. But the wolf's blood, which was supposed to bind them together in common purpose, made them instinctively fight anything infected by the same substance. And eventually they were all infected, because the abyss is relentless, and the Watchers who fought it long enough absorb trace amounts of what they fought. And so they fight each other, endlessly, burning in the same chamber where they once gathered as brothers. This is what happens to institutions built on pure vigilance. Sooner or later, everything looks like the enemy. Lothric himself, the Holy King Lothric, last hope of his line, refused to link the fire. He was born sickly, too frail to endure the consumption of linking, and his twin brother Lorien took the brunt of the flame on his behalf. Lorien's legs were cursed in the process. He moves on his knees. Lothric rides his brother's back when the fight demands movement. They are 2 people who have been bound together by circumstances neither chose, one too weak to do what was asked of him, one bearing the damage of having done it in his place, and together they form a single boss that represents something the other Lords of Cinder do not: a refusal, a considered, informed no to the proposition that the cycle deserves to continue. Now, here is where we arrive at the end of the world. Not the end of a kingdom, not the end of an age, but the actual end. The final chapter of the Dark Souls series is set at the literal terminus of time, a desert at the edge of everything, where the ruins of Anor Londo and Lothric Castle can be seen collapsing in the distance, where the sky is the color of dying fire, and where the last few survivors of civilizations that ended centuries or millennia ago are gathering without entirely understanding why. The Ringed City was built at the beginning of the Age of Fire, or close to it. When the Dragon Wars were over and Gwyn was building his empire, he needed somewhere to put the humans. The humans, with their dark souls and their potential and their capacity to eventually become something that Gwyn feared, needed to be contained, not killed exactly, not openly oppressed, but managed. The Ringseed city was the management solution. He gave the Pygmy lords, the royal descendants of the furtive Pygmy, their own city. A beautiful city, ring-shaped, built at the edge of the world. He gave them a daughter, Filianor, one of his own children, sent to live among the Pygmy lords as a gift, or a marriage alliance, or a hostage, or some diplomatic construction that served multiple purposes simultaneously. Filianor slept in the innermost tower of the city, and as long as she slept, time moved strangely around the ringed city. The city was hidden from the rest of the world, preserved, its inhabitants kept alive in a kind of stasis by the magic of a god's child dreaming at the center of everything. The ringed knights, those warriors in dark armor that you first encounter in the city, carried the dark sign on their flesh. Gwyn sealed it there with fire, binding the dark to them in a way that prevented it from expressing outward. They were undead soldiers with the darkness literally burned into their bodies, carriers of the curse rather than its victims, and in exchange for that burden, they were given eternity in the form of the city and Filianor's dream. This is Gwyn's containment strategy made physical. The ringed city is not a gift. It is a gilded prison, and the Pygmy lords have been ruling it and maintaining its stasis for so long that they have become desiccated and hollow and nearly dead, their dark souls drained away over the millennia until there is almost nothing left of them. Old men in crownless robes shuffling through a city that time has forgotten. Slave knight Gale comes here at the end of time. Gale is introduced in the Ashes of Ariandel DLC as a servant, a loyalist, a rough-hewn old fighter in slave knight's armor who has devoted himself to the service of the young painter, creating a new world in the ashes of the old. She needs the blood of the dark soul, the pure concentrated essence of what the furtive Pygmy originally found in the dark, to paint the cold of her new world. And Gale has gone out to find it for her. His search brings him to the ringed city, because that is where the descendants of the furtive Pygmy have been preserved, because their blood, dried though it may be after all these centuries, still carries traces of the dark soul. And Gale does something monstrous and necessary, and, in the context of Dark Souls, somehow exactly right. He finds the Pygmy lords on their thrones. He devours them. One by one, he takes what is left of their dark souls, absorbing it into himself, filling the hole in his chest where the power accumulates and burns. When you finally reach him, at the absolute end of the world, in a desert that used to be the ringed city before time caught up to it, he has consumed all of them, and the power is tearing him apart. The dark soul is not meant to be held entirely by one person. It was fragmented for a reason, scattered across all of humanity for a reason, and consolidating it causes a breakdown that no single body can contain cleanly. Gale is coming apart at the seams of himself, his armor not quite fitting anymore, his chest cracked open by the force of what's inside him. And he attacks you, not because he wants to hurt you, but because he has held on to one thing through all of this madness. He knows the painter needs the blood. He knows you need to take it from him. He has been waiting for you or someone like you, and the only way he knows to offer what you need is to fight you for it, because that is the only way anything meaningful is ever offered in Lordran. The fight against Slave Knight Gale is one of the most spectacular and emotionally complex encounters in the history of the series. It takes place in a vast desert as the sky goes dark with storm clouds, as the ruins of everything that has ever been crumble in the distance, as the music builds into something that manages to be both triumphant and absolutely heartbreaking at the same time. Gale fights in 3 phases, each more desperate and more unraveling than the last, throwing everything he has with the energy of someone burning the last of themselves to finish a job. He was never powerful by the standards of this universe. He was a slave knight, used as fodder in battles that the important people did not want to attend themselves. He was not a god or a lord of cinder or a bearer of cosmic destiny. He was a loyal old man who loved someone and found a purpose in that love, and who went to the end of the world to keep a promise, and who is dying from what he swallowed to keep it. When he falls, the blood of the dark soul pools on the sand. You take it, you bring it back to the painter, and she uses it to paint something cold and dark and new, something that will become a world when the one you are standing in is finally gone. She does not name it. She says she will name it after a friend, someone kind, and then she goes back to painting. The last thing you see, if you stay, is a small painting beginning to take shape. A new world, made of the oldest things, offered to everyone who never had a place in the world that was ending. There is a quality to this ending that took me a long time to find the right words for. It is not triumphant in the way that endings are usually allowed to be triumphant. The world is still ending. The fire has not been relit. The great buildings in the distance are still falling. The sky is still the color of things that burned too long ago to still be burning. None of that is fixed. None of that is addressed by what the painter is doing with her small brush and her quiet concentration in her little enclosure of the world. But something is beginning. Right there, in the middle of all that ending, something is beginning. And the person who begins it is not a god or a chosen hero or a king with an army. She is a young woman who was shown a kindness, who was given what she needed, who was using it to make somewhere warm and real for people who need warmth and reality. Gael died so that a painter could make something cold and real. This is not the story the Age of Fire would have told about itself. It is not a story of gods or kings or cycles or chosen heroes. It is a story about a man who was never important, deciding to be the most important person in the world for the one thing that mattered, and succeeding, and dying, and being enough. This is the inheritance of the dark soul, finally. Not power accumulated, not fire sustained, not a cycle preserved or a cycle broken in the dramatic way. Just this, something made. Something that did not exist before, made by someone who cared, in the last light of everything else going dark. The furtive pygmy scattered the dark soul into all of humanity. Thousands of years later, a slave knight gathered it back together, paid the cost of holding it, and gave it to a painter. And the painter is painting. Section 11. The endings, the cycle, and what Dark Souls ultimately believes. Everything in Dark Souls moves toward a choice. Not a dramatic, world-altering moment of decision the way most games frame their endings, but something quieter, and in some ways more personal. You have traveled through the whole of Lordran, absorbing the deaths of everything you killed and everything that killed you, accumulating souls and insight and the slow, incremental weight of a world's history. And now, you have to choose what to do with that. The first game offers two endings that are almost mirror images of each other in structure, but opposites in meaning. If you link the fire, you become the next sacrifice in the line that started with Gwyn. You take everything you have accumulated, all those souls, all that power, and you offer it to the flame the way Gwyn offered himself. The fire flares. The darkness retreats. The Age of Fire continues, diminished but present for another cycle. Another chosen undead will eventually wake at another crossroads and make the same journey, probably not knowing that you did it first. The cycle continues. This is Framp's ending. It is what the Way of White teaches, what Gwendolyn maintained the illusion for, what Gwyn's entire architecture of the world was designed to produce. It is also, and this is important to sit with, a genuine act of sacrifice. You chose it. Whatever motivated that choice, whatever you believed about what it meant, you gave what you had to keep something alive. The fact that the thing you kept alive is a system built on exploitation does not entirely erase the sincerity of the choice. But sincerity is not the same as wisdom, and this is one of the things Dark Souls is very patient about teaching. You can be completely sincere in the choice you make in the kiln, and still be wrong about what that choice accomplishes. You can link the fire from a place of genuine selflessness, believing you are serving the world, and the system you have served will simply grind forward and consume the next person in your position, who will also be sincere, who will also believe they are serving the world, who will never know your name or what you chose or that you were ever there. If you do not link the fire, if you let it go out and claim the title the game calls the Dark Lord, the darkness rises. Not dramatically, not with special effects and ominous music. The fire simply fades, and the darkness simply fills the space where it was, and the world begins moving toward the Age of Dark that was always its natural destination. Keathi is pleased. Humanity has its inheritance. What that inheritance means in practice, what the world of the Age of Dark looks like, what human civilization builds in it, these things are left unshown, because the game ends at the threshold of the New Age, not inside it. This ambiguity is deliberate and significant. Dark Souls will not tell you whether the Age of Dark is good or bad because it does not know, and because saying it would be dishonest in a story that has been very honest about the costs of certainty. Everyone who was certain in this world paid for it. Gwyn was certain that the Age of Fire must continue, and he burned himself to ash over it. The Witch of Izalith was certain she could replicate the first flame, and she destroyed a civilization over it. Seath was certain that immortality was worth any cost, and he lost everything worth preserving in the process of acquiring it. The game has shown you, over and over, what certainty does to people who have power, and it is not going to commit the same error at the end. Dark Souls 2 complicates both of these framings by suggesting that neither choice is permanent. The cycle repeats regardless. Kingdom after kingdom has linked or not linked the fire, and the world keeps going through the same arc of fire and ash and fire again. Vendrick, who understood this, asks you to seek a third path. His brother Aldrich, who has been conducting experiments so extreme that he burned away his own flesh and became something that exists in a barely visible shimmer between presence and absence, manifests in the Scholar of the First Sin version of the game to say something similar. He says there is no path forward from the cycle, only the cycle. But he also suggests that understanding the cycle completely might allow you to transcend it in a way that neither linking nor refusing to link manages to do. Aldrich is fascinating, precisely because he pursued knowledge to its most painful conclusion. He experimented on dragons, on giants, on anything he could find that carried information about the fundamental nature of existence, trying to understand the cycle from the inside in a way that might reveal an exit. He lost his body in the process. He exists now as something between a ghost and a flame, barely visible, occasionally manifesting to speak in fragments that suggest he has found something, some piece of the truth that normal existence cannot hold. He does not tell you what it is. He has been working on it for a very long time and has not found the answer. He offers you his observation, which is worth more than nothing, and watches you leave. Dark Souls 3 presents the fullest version of both choices and the most explicitly hopeful third option. You can link the flame, as always. In Dark Souls 3, this produces an ending called the End of Fire, where the Ashen One burns, and the Firekeeper tends the last embers, and the Age of Fire ends but the embers remain, small and persistent, waiting. It is not a triumphant ending. It is a dignified one, a choice made clearly rather than made desperately. And the image of the Firekeeper tending those last small lights suggests that whatever comes after the fire will not be entirely dark. You can usurp the fire through a long and complex quest line involving the followers of Uria of Londor, and become something called the Lord of Hollows. In this ending, the fire is absorbed into you rather than the other way around, and you carry it into the world rather than letting it expire in the kiln. This is a strange ending, neither the sacrifice of the previous age nor the rejection of fire entirely. Something new and uncomfortable, and arguably more honest about what the cycle does to the people caught in it. You become something that carries the fire without being consumed by it, which is perhaps what the age always needed. Not a hero who burns, a person who holds warmth without needing to be lit. And there is an ending called the Betrayal of the Firekeeper, which requires you to give a set of Firekeeper eyes to the woman who tends the last bonfire, and which unlocks a version of the End of Fire ending in which the Firekeeper extinguishes even the last embers. The screen goes completely dark. A voice, hers, speaks in the absolute absence of light. She says something beautiful and strange, that the form of fire itself and of people might change in time, that things need not remain what they were, that the end of fire is not the end of everything, but the end of the particular shape everything has been. This ending is not in the game's base version. It requires a choice and an item, and the willingness to believe that the absence of the flame is not the same as the absence of meaning. It requires trusting a Firekeeper who is breaking the rules of everything she was built to do, because she can see that what she was built to do has run its course. The Firekeeper is worth sitting with for a moment, because she is one of the series' most quietly significant characters. She is not a hero, she does not fight. She tends the flame and receives the Ashen One, and speaks gently in a dark that would otherwise be complete silence. She was made to serve the bonfire the way Gwendolyn was made to serve the illusion of Anor Londo, and like Gwendolyn, she has been doing it alone in a place that everyone else has left. But unlike Gwendolyn, when given the chance to step outside the role she was built for, she takes it. She uses the eyes of a Firekeeper to see what the world looks like without fire in it, and what she sees does not destroy her. It gives her a different kind of vision, and she uses that vision to do something no Firekeeper has done before. She chooses. What does Dark Souls believe? I think it believes that cycles are real, that they are powerful and self-sustaining, and very difficult to break. That the people inside them almost always do the best they can with what they understand, and that this does not prevent their best from being insufficient, from perpetuating the very thing they were trying to escape. Gwyn was not a villain in the melodramatic sense. He was afraid, and he had enormous power, and he used that power to do what people with enormous power and specific fears tend to do, which is build systems to protect themselves from the thing they fear, and then spend centuries watching those systems exact costs they did not intend on people they did not consider. The undead are not the victims of a random curse. They are the fuel of someone else's engine, and they mostly do not know this, and some of them do know it and do not know what to do with the knowledge, and a few of them figure out something to do and die in the attempt. The cycle is not unbreakable. The painter breaks it or starts to. Not through power, not through being chosen, but through creation, through making something new in a space that has run out of new things to make, through using the most ancient and most fundamental material, the dark soul, the original inheritance of humanity, to paint something that has never existed before. The series also believes something about time, though it rarely states this directly. Every kingdom in Dark Souls comes from the wreckage of the one before. Drangleic is built on Lordran's ruins. Lothric inherits from Drangleic. The ringed city stands at the end of all of them. But something persists across all of these transitions. The people persist. Not the same people, not even the same kinds of people, but the basic human fact of people who care about things and build things and lose them and keep going. The fire changes. The kingdoms change. The gods die and are forgotten. The people remain, carrying their fragments of the dark soul, trying to figure out what to do with what they have. Dark Souls trusts you, ultimately. It trusts you to pay attention to the texture of what is happening around you. It trusts you to find the sadness in the things you are killing and the beauty in the places you are moving through. It trusts you to accumulate, death by death and bonfire by bonfire, an understanding that the world it is showing you is tragic, not because it could not have been otherwise, but precisely because it could have, and the people who built it chose wrong, or were afraid, or were never given the chance to choose at all. And at the end of the world, in a desert where everything is ending, a young woman paints something cold and new for everyone who never had a place in the world that was dying. She does it quietly, without announcement, without prophecy, without anyone telling her it was the right thing. She does it because the person she loved went to the end of the world to give her what she needed, and because the world deserves something new after all this time. That is what Dark Souls believes, that in the ash of everything that burned, there is something that can still be made. That the most important act is not the linking of the fire or the snuffing of it, but the small, quiet, completely human act of making something that did not exist before you arrived. Conclusion. The world that remains, and so, here we arrive at the end of our long journey through Lordran and Drangleic and Lothric, through the age of ancients and the age of fire and the ash of everything that followed, through the histories of gods and knights and scholars and serpents, through the stories of people who loved too much and feared too much and reached too bism, and in doing so, set in motion the 10,000 years of consequence we have spent tonight exploring. There is something that I think deserves to be said about what this story is, beneath the dragons and the fire and the hollow crowns and the crumbling castles. It is a story about the things that people will do to avoid losing what they love. Gwyn loved the Age of Fire. The Witch of Izalith loved her civilization and her power over it. Seath loved the idea of living forever. Artorias loved a wolf he had fought alongside long enough that the bond between them was worth more than his own survival. Vendrick loved a woman who was using him. The painter loves the friend who went to the end of the world for her. None of these loves are simple. None of them end neatly. Some of them are catastrophic in their consequences, but they are all recognizable as the thing that drives people past the point where purely rational calculation would have told them to stop. This is why the series resonates the way it does, beyond the spectacle of its world and the challenge of its combat. It is taking love seriously as a force that operates at the scale of civilizations and ages, that bends history and creates monsters and maintains illusions for centuries and sends old men to the end of time to collect paint. The fire fades. This is the sentence the series keeps returning to. It is the premise and the warning and the question rolled into one. The fire fades. And what we do about that, what we choose when we are standing at the edge of the dying flame, defines what we are. The answers the series offers are not all equal. Linking the fire is real sacrifice, but it perpetuates what should end. Rejecting the fire is honest but incomplete, a beginning without a story attached to it. The third path, the one that belongs to painters and firekeepers who choose to see differently, is the quietest and the most genuine. It does not solve everything. It does not offer certainty. It offers only the possibility that something new might grow in the space where the old thing was, if someone is willing to do the work of making it. This is the story Dark Souls has been telling across 3 games and however many millions of hours of play. Not the story of a hero who saves a world, because the world does not get saved in the way that word usually means. Not the story of a villain who destroys one, because the villainy is always at least partially understandable, and the destruction is always at least partially the cost of what came before. But the story of a world running out of room, and the small, tenacious people in it who refuse to stop trying to make something worth holding on to. The bonfires that feel like home in the dark. Sif guarding the grave. Quelana walking the swamp, carrying the knowledge her family burned for. The painter, adding color to a world that does not exist yet. These are the images that last. There is something that I think deserves to be said about what this story is, beneath the dragons and the fire, and the hollow crowns and the crumbling castles. It is a story about the things that people will do to avoid losing what they love. Gwyn loved the Age of Fire. The Witch of Izalith loved her civilization and her power over it. Seath loved the idea of living forever. Artorias loved a wolf he had fought alongside long enough that the bond between them was worth more than his own survival. Vendrick loved a woman who was using him. The painter loves the friend who went to the end of the world for her. None of these loves are simple. None of them end neatly. Some of them are catastrophic in their consequences. But they are all recognizable as the thing that drives people past the point where purely rational calculation would have told them to stop. This is why the series resonates the way it does, beyond the spectacle of its world and the challenge of its combat. It is taking love seriously as a force that operates at the scale of civilizations and ages, that bends history and creates monsters and maintains illusions for centuries and sends old men to the end of time to collect paint. If you are still awake, I hope you found something in this that was worth staying for. These are stories that reward attention, that give more the more you offer them, that have been turning in the minds of people since 2011 in ways that keep producing new angles and new meanings. If you drifted somewhere in the middle of it all, that is exactly right too. Let the gray crags of the Age of Ancients be the last landscape you carry into sleep. Let the warmth of a bonfire be the warmth you feel as you settle. Let the quiet patience of Sif at her master's grave be the last image. If this gave you something, if you want to come back to this world and keep exploring it, please consider subscribing. It is the simplest way to make sure you never miss another 2 hours of whatever story comes next. Leave a comment too, about the character who stayed with you, the moment that landed differently than you expected, the question the lore left open that you keep thinking about. The cycle of fire and dark keeps turning. Somewhere in the deep, the first flame still holds its warmth. And somewhere at the edge of the world, a painter adds a careful brushstroke to something new. Good night, good hunter, or perhaps, this time, good unkindled. May the fire guide your way.